A thin square of gold rests on a cushion of air, and a quiet breath lays it down so lightly that it clings like morning frost. Beside it, a small bowl of egg and pigment waits, the color no larger than a walnut. Welcome, and whenever you're ready to drift off, let your shoulders soften and your breath slow. Tonight, let's quietly explore for rooms where patient hands kept the world steady. We'll begin in a Byzantine icon workshop at dawn, where gold leaf meets egg tempera and halos learn to shine. We'll climb to a medieval forest apiary, where honey sleeps in high hollow pines and smoke teaches calm. Then we'll sit in a Persian loom room in Kashan, where yarn turns into a garden of knots and the comb beats a soft rhythm. And finally, we'll ride a night mail car, where letters find their places by lamplight and the rails hum a gentle line. The pace will stay slow, the language simple, and each sound small and sleep safe. No sudden turns, no sharp edges, just steady motions. Ordinary tools and the hush of everyday work. As you settle in for the night, we'll notice small textures: bowl under gold, rope scars on bark, indigo on wool, pencil on a pigeonhole tag, if your mind is ready. We'll begin where breath sets down a sheet of light and color learns patience. The forest wakes in slow layers. Mist lifts from reeds and slips between trunks. Needles hold beads of water that do not hurry. Somewhere, a woodpecker taps once, then listens to its own echo. The path underfoot is soft with last year's pine, brown and springy like felt. A man walks with an easy load. Linen shirt, wool sash, felt cap pulled low. Over one shoulder he carries a coil of hemp rope thick as his thumb. Tied to the coil are the tools he trusts: a small hand axe with a smooth handle, a smoke pot made of clay, a bone knife wrapped in linen, and a narrow wooden paddle the length of his forearm. In a net bag hang two plugs of woven straw and bark. A short ladder of cord and flat wooden steps lies folded like a sleeping fish. He stops at a clearing where pines grow tall and straight. Halfway up their trunks, oval scars show old work. Hive mouths cut in the bark years ago and taught to heal around the opening. Each oval is a doorway to a hollow carved deep in the heartwood, lined with propolis and guarded by small, busy citizens. Some doorways were a sign. Near the lip, a carved mark to crossed cuts, a hook, a circle says who keeps this hive. Forest law here remembers such marks better than names. He lays the rope at the foot of a chosen tree and looks up. The hive mouth faces east, polite to morning. Resin beads along the cut edge, amber tears that stop mid-fall. He touches the bark, and then his forehead, a small habit. This tree has fed his household for years. He knows the roughness of this ladder of knots the way a pot knows a hand. Smoke first. He fills the clay pot with a twist of dry punkwood and a pinch of rotten log, sets a coal from last night's ember, and breathes until a thin thread of smoke curls from the lip. He caps the pot with a perforated lid and tests the stream with his palm. Not too much. Bees prefer a gentle story, not a shout. The rope harness goes around his waist and around the tree with a broad band. He sets the first wooden step against the trunk, pulls the rope snug with a hip, and stands. The next step goes higher. Pull, stand. The tree's skin whispers under his soles. Resin wakes and perfumes the air clean, sweet, a little like honey that has learned to be pine. Climbing like this is an old practice. In this place and century, it is common to meet honey at height. He reaches the oval and settles into the work. The plug in the hive mouth is a woven cork of straw and bark. It breaks its seal with a small sigh. Warm air flows out, rich with the smell of comb and wings. The bees speak in a single note that changes as the smoke drifts in. He tips a little gray into the hollow, waits to breaths, and hears the tone soften. Calm is a shared craft. He grips the wooden paddle and the bone knife. The paddle is narrow with edges rounded, friendly to wax. The bone knife has a flat back and a keen front, sharpened on stone and polished with fat. He slides the paddle under the first comb, lifting gently so it does not tear. The bone knife trims the capped honey where it joins the roof of the hollow. White caps, neat as stitches, part and show cells the color of weak tea. Honey glows without sparkle. It keeps its own dignity. He knows what to cut and what to leave. Brood comb stays, winter stores in the center stay. He looks for the pale, sealed sections near the outer curve, heavy with the season's kindness. The paddle supports. The knife releases. His hands move slow, steady, respectful. Each piece lowers into a linen cloth he has tucked under the rope at his belt. The cloth's weave is loose enough to breathe, tight enough to guard. Between cuts he rests the smoke pot in a notch near the mouth, letting the thin thread drift. Bees settle deeper into the hollow bodies warmed by their gathered breath. Bees do not belong to him, not really. He belongs to a corridor of trees and a set of careful habits. Honey and wax will leave with him, but most of the hive remains to go on. When the cloth is full, he ties it with a simple knot and hooks it to his belt. A cord basket waits below. He lowers the bundle on a line, hand under hand, watching as it turns once, twice, then steadies. The rope strokes his palm like an old cat. On the ground the basket receives what the season gave. He leans into the hollow again for a last look. With the paddle he smooths a rough edge where knife met comb, making the cut site even. He inspects the inner bark for damp or mold. None today? Good. He takes a pinch of propolis from a corner dark, sticky, resinous, and warms it in his fingers. He presses it along a hairline crack near the mouth, sealing a draft. He lifts the smoke pot, breathes once more into the belly of the hive, and sets the woven plug back into the opening. The plug's rim meets bark with a faint grit, and then a soft click as straw finds the mark it learned last year. He descends the ladder the way he climbed it. Step, loosen, slide the band step. Pine sap darkens his palms. He rubs them together and smiles. On the ground, he turns to the tree and scratches a small line near his mark. A tally notched into living wood, not to own more, only to remember which hives he has visited this round. In many forests, wax is tax and offering both. Monasteries ask for it, markets praise it, and houses need it. Honey sweetens porridge and keeps fruit kindly. The work is quiet, but its path is long. He checks the basket. The cloth bundles shine through their weave. A fly visits and leaves. He adds a lid-thin board and birch bark tie so the forest will not help itself. He drinks from a wooden cup. The water is cold, kept in a skin near the ground where moss is kind. A heel of bread waits in his pouch with a pinch of salt. He eats without ceremony, sitting on a fallen trunk that smells of damp and slow change. The day stretches. He will visit to more hives before noon, then carry wax and honey home in a frame slung from his shoulders. Later, the wax will melt in a wide pot strained through linen that will go on to other lives' wicks perhaps, or padding for a shoe. Honey will settle in a clay jar. A lid of leather tied with cord will keep it honest. Some will travel to a market by river. Some will feed his family when snow makes the world simple. All of it will taste of place, pine in the nose, meadow in the mouth, and the fine clean of this cool air. He stands and gathers rope, ladder tools. The smoke pot he empties, grinding the last ember out with a stick and covering the ash. He brushes the plug with his hand once, a silent thanks that has no need of words. Then he steps onto the path, and the forest closes behind him like a curtain that knows its part. The path bends toward a wet place where sedge grows in wide cones and frogs practice patience. The pine trunks are farther apart here. Their feet drink from dark water that moves without appearing to move. Dragonflies draw slow blue lines in the warm air. The beekeeper knows a hive above this marshy glade, a good one, mild in weather like this. He tests the ground with his staff and chooses a drier thread between the hummocks. At the base of the chosen pine he lays down his bundle in order, rope coil to the left, ladder steps to the right, smoke pot above the line, basket below. He speaks to no one and everything at once with a small nod. The hive mouth is higher here, cut long ago by someone whose mark is a hooked line into notches. His own sign, carved lower down on the same tree, is a circle with a short tail. Forest law is simple, and old each hive has its keepers. Strangers touch only in need or with permission. Fines are paid in wax, which suits all parties. In places like this, law walks with rope on its shoulder. He fills the clay pot with punk and a shred of dried horsetail, sets a coal into the bed and breathes until smoke rises thin and steady. At the tree he loops the broad band and leans his weight into it. The first footboard kisses bark and holds. He climbs in the quiet rhythm learned by repetition. Pull step, tighten, pull step, tighten. The pine gives back a smell of resin and cool damp. A small owl, surprised by a daytime guest, blinks from a nearby fork and decides to become bark. At the oval mouth he rests, feet planted against the trunk, hips in the rope sling. The woven plug is sound, but slightly stuck. Marsh air does that. He worries it free with the bone knife and catches it before it falls. Warmth breathes out. Bees voice a low note, and then flatten to quieter as smoke tells its soft story. He does not flood the hollow. He gives only enough to slow the news. Instead of the linen cloth used earlier, he prepares 2 combs of birch bark thin, peeled in spring and kept rolled with small sticks because pieces from this hive are usually long and prefer a firmer cradle. He opens one cone and sets its seam against a wooden peg fitted near the mouth years ago for just this purpose. The cone's pale inside shows the memory of the tree it once was, fine lines like the rings on a thumb. He slides the wooden paddle under a length of capped comb and lifts. The bone knife follows, separating the sweet weight from the roof. The cells hold like ordered rain. He lays the slab into the birch cone and lets it sit at a tilt so slowly weeping honey will gather in the narrow end and not drown the wax. He ties the cone with a twist of lime bast and moves to the next. Brood comb and pollen comb remain untouched. He marks their position in his head the way he marks paths with his feet. Between cuts he smooths rough edges with the paddle and checks the hollow with the small mirror he carries, just a polished shard of tin bound to a stick. In the dimness the mirror gathers enough sky to let him see the back wall, dry and clean, with old propolis-like dark varnish between seams. A slight draught breeze from an unseen crack. He softens a ball of pitch between his palms and presses it along the leak until the air chooses a new path. Bees prefer a house that minds its doors. When both birch cones hold their share, he ties them to his belt and lowers them on separate lines so they will not knock together. The ground receives them in a nest of sedge laid ready by habit. He replaces the plug, brushing the rim with his thumb as if explaining that all is well. Yael decides to be a small, slow wind and leaves without leaving sound. On the ground he sets a small tally at the base of the pine, 3 short cuts and a longer that ties them. It is not for counting today, he knows the day by its smell. It is for winter, when memory likes to see what it can no longer touch. He writes the same mark on a flat of birch bark with a coal stub and tucks it into the basket lid. Back at the yard, which is a clearing with a low shed and 2 troughs cut from split logs, the afternoon lengthens into work that does not mind length. He builds a small fire under the tripod and sets on it a wide-bellied pot half full of water. The water will never boil. It will sit and think. Over it he places a second vessel, shallower, so the heat will be kind. Comb from the birch cones and linen bundle goes into this upper pan. He breaks it with a wooden spoon, not to harm, only to help. Honey loosens from wax and sinks like amber fish into the warm water below. The shed fills with a smell that is more than sweet, a smell of field and tree, of air boiled into memory. He lifts the broken wax with a slotted ladle into the second trough, a long wooden cradle lined with coarse linen. A stone set under one end makes a shallow slope. He pours warm water over the heap, not hot, urging the honey to run through the cloth. It threads out slow and clear, carrying bits of comb dust that settle like silt. This may seem wasteful by later habits, but here and now slow washing is thought to make a cleaner candle and a calmer flame. From the first pot he ladles honey into a clay jar, steady as oil. Bits of wax ride the surface. He catches them with a willow twig bent into a loop. The jar, warm still, goes to the cool earth at the edge of the shed, where a shallow hole has been lined with flat stones. It will rest there until evening takes the last dust from it. Later, a leather lid tied with narrow bark will teach it to stay. In the second trough the wax gathers, pale gold, cooling in rafts. He lifts them onto a board and, when they firm, presses each into a shallow wooden mold rubbed with fat. The cakes keep the shape of the mold round with a rim like a coin and carry a stamp on one side, his sign cut into the block. Stacked 3 and 3, they look like quiet suns. Monks will trade salt or smoked fish for these, and sometimes a paper of letters. In winter, his own house will welcome a candle that listens rather than complains. Beeswax burns without the hard voice of tallow. He twists a few wicks as the wax waits, flax strands rolled on his thigh with a touch of ash water, then dried on a cord. Wicks live in a small box with needles and a bone spool. He saves any cream crumbs of wax in a pouch. Nothing that burned under bees should be wasted. He strains the last pan of honey through fine linen tighter weave, cloth that once was a shirt, and watches the thin thread draw a hill in the jar. A fly thinks about landing, then thinks better. The jar is nearly full. He leaves a little space at the top for quiet. He wipes the rim with a damp rag and sets the lid, pressing the tie knot flat so winter fingers can untie it without waking the house. Before the light leans away from the yard, he puts tools back where their hands know to find them tomorrow. Bone knife in its wrap, paddle on its peg, smoke pot upturned to dry, ladder steps stacked under cover, rope coiled loose so it does not remember kinks. He washes his hands in cool water scented by a thumb of crushed pine needles. Sap fades, skin feels useful again. He tastes a spoon of the new honey, just one, so he can name the day to himself. The flavor says meadow near water, clover near rye, and a little willow. He nods as if someone had agreed with him. In the distance, a church bell counts a number that does not need to be exact. He covers the jars with a cloth and carries the wax cakes into the shed, where a shelf waits with last year's round ends that smell like a lost summer. Evening folds itself along the tree line. Bats begin their patient handwriting in the sky. The yard grows quiet in the best way. Tomorrow there will be 2 more hives and a visit from a trader who walks the river road with salt in a leather sack and news in his pocket for now. The forest holds the man and his shed like a cupped hand. Morning sifts through older leaves along the river path. Water moves like a long thought, not urgent, only certain. The beekeeper walks with a frame across his shoulders. On one side a basket with wax cakes stamped from yesterday, on the other a clay jar wrapped in plaited reeds. The strap creaks in a familiar way. His staff touches the ground where the bank turns soft, testing the soggy places before his feet do. At a bend where a willow leans toward its own reflection, a trader waits. He has come many summers, always with the same leather bag and the same patient eyes. On his mat he spreads small fortunes that a household understands, a twist of salt the size of a fist, a bunch of iron nails wrapped in rag, 2 needles bright as fish bones, a little mirror in a wooden frame, a coil of linen thread, a knife stone rubbed smooth like river glass. They greet each other with a nod that means nothing needs explaining. Trade is not quick here. The beekeeper sets the wax cakes by 3s, their stamped faces turned upward. The trader balances one on a small scale that hangs from a loop, waits in the other pan clinking like quiet teeth. He tests the honey too, tilting the jar so the thread falls, and lifts like silk. They talk in small pieces about the road, about the monastery's need for wax ahead of the feast, about a ferry rope that frayed in a storm, and has now been mended with a splice that will outlive the boatman. They exchange as if folding cloth, 2 cakes of wax for a fist of salt, and the needles, 3 for nails, and good thread, a measure of honey for the sharpening of the bone knife on the trader's stone, and a promise of fish when the weir is full. The trader wraps each gift in bark or rag so nothing knocks. The beekeeper nicks one of his wax cakes with the knife, takes a grain on the blade, and lets it soften between thumb and forefinger. Clean dot, no grit. The trader nods as if to say he already knew. When the mat is rolled and the bag buckled, they stand a moment and look at the river, which does not ask to be admired. The trader touches 2 fingers to the brim of his cap. The beekeeper lifts his staff in answer. They leave by different paths that know their feet. Back in the yard the shade lies short. A quiet task waits under the eaves, weaving new hive plugs. The old ones, useful still, show tooth marks and a little wet, the way straw does after a long season. He brings out bundles of rye straw kept dry under a thatch lip, and a coil of limebast cord, a soft ribbon peeled from linden and dried, then rawet today until it remembers how to bend without breaking. He starts with a tight ring, 3 straws laid in a small circle and stitched with bast, round and round with a rhythm that never looks at the clock. The coil grows outward like a snail shell. Every few turns he presses the edge against a wooden gauge the size of a hive mouth he knows, so the plug will sit without argument. A curved awl opens a path for the bast, the cord slips through and tightens with a soft squeak. The straw ends are tucked under as the coil turns, each cut at an angle so no rough edge asks for attention. When the disc is broad enough, he starts to dome it a little by pulling stitches tighter on the inner turn. The plug rises toward a shallow cap straw, thick, airlight. At the center he leaves a thumb-sized hollow that can be opened with a twist if winter air grows damp and the hive wants to breathe more. He trims the dome smooth and rubs its face with a piece of pitch warmed in his hands, just enough to teach it to shed a small rain and to remember the shape of the opening. Along the rim he runs a narrow band of bast, binding the edge so it will not fray when hands and weather-tested. For hives whose lips are old and splintered, he makes a different pattern, a plug of bark and straw together, a bark oval cut from spring birch or alder, softened in warm water and stitched to a straw face so the smooth bark sits outward and slides. Home without argument. He pricks his mark a circle with a tail into the bark with the point of his awl. Forest law is polite but clear, a mark says who will return. He sets the new plugs in a row on the bench, where sun and pine scent teach them to be ready. Beside them he arranges a little tray for smoke, a lidded clay pot, and small bundles for burning touchwood from a tender fungus dried in the rafters, punk from rotted willow, curls of birch bark, and a herb or two. He pinches a bit of mugwort between finger and thumb. Its smell is green and shy. Not much is needed. Bees answer to low, cool smoke. Thick, hot smoke tells the wrong story. He packs the pot like a small garden, a base of touchwood to take a coal, a piece of punk to keep the ember honest, a curl of bark for a quick start, a breath of mugwort for calm. He lights and tests, puts his wrist in the stream, never the back of the hand, always the soft skin, so heat will speak earlier. The smoke that leaves the pot today is gray as river stone and slow as fog. Good. He mends the rope while the pot mutters to itself. The climbing band's broad back has known bark this summer. He rubs tallow into the outside where resin drank it away. At the splice he adds a whipping of waxed thread, neat turns laid one beside the next with the patient vanity of things never seen. If the rope lives well, it will keep him living well. He turns each wooden step in his hands to feel for splinters that might quarrel with skin. Those that do are sanded with a scrap of shark skin kept for this single job. In the late afternoon he reads the sky the way he reads a hive. High, thin mare's tails run from west to east cirrus that often say weather will change, not today, perhaps tomorrow evening. A pale ring faintly rims the sun, ice far above has made a halo. The wind is a breath from the south, warm enough that ants at the yard's edge still write low lines, and do not build their little walls. Swallows fly high and lazy. Midges stand in thin columns over the damp places. Pine cones on the shed roof gape a little but not wide. All this makes a page that says, "Come tonight, cool tomorrow, perhaps a light rain by the second evening." He says it aloud, not for the trees, not for himself, but because speaking makes memory slower and more sure. Bees write their own forecast. At the edge of the clearing they travel with baskets barely full. The heavy bloom of linden is past, and the meadow's late flowers give what they can. Returning foragers land soft and walk unhurried. Guards at the hive mouths are wakeful, not sharp. When summer leans into its later part, bees spend more time talking to each other at thresholds, and the beekeeper listens to their side of the conversation. If they stand tall and widen the entrance with their bodies, he knows heat is their concern. If they fan with their bellies to the air, he brings a windbreak. If they start to quarrel with neighbors in a show of loud wings and legs, he will narrow the door with a chip of wood and a prayer for patience. He checks his own small signs as well. The bowstring by the door pulls tighter in the evening damp. The linden bast cord on the ladder loosens. He tightens one, slackens the other. The staff he uses at the river weighs a touch more. The reed-wrapped jar feels cool through its skin. Even frogs recite weather, their chorus thin tonight, perhaps thinking of the moon's smallness. Before dusk, he visits to tree mouths with the new plugs tucked under an arm. The old corks lift with the particular sound straw makes when it leaves on its bark, half crunch, half sigh. He seats the new ones with a twist and a press. Each finds its place like a word fits a line already waiting for it. Round one opening he sneers a finger of propolis saved from earlier bee's own glue, pine-scented, and stubborn to seal what bark left untidy. He touches the mark near the lip, not to rename, only to greet. As light thins, he hangs the smoke pot under the eaves to sleep, a lid on its breath and a stone on its lid. He coils the rope and lays it wide. He brushes the bench clear with a bundle of twigs tied in their own handle. The yard cools like a cup forgotten and found again. Owls rehearse their single note. A fox writes a short sentence in dust and edits it with a tail. He stands a moment where the path leaves the clearing and reads the sky one more time. The cirrus have drifted a little north. The halo has walked off, not good. He imagines tomorrow's work to ladder's worth of climbing, 3 plugs to test, a short walk with wax to the monastery gate where the candlemaker keeps his books. He feels the day settle like a cloak. Inside the shed, a last task. He ties 4 wicks to a crossbar in readiness. Linen spun earlier on his thigh, rubbed with a breath of ash water so they will drink wax, and then speak with a small, steady voice. He sets the crossbar onto pegs over the trough, just so, and smiles at the neatness of something that has not happened yet. He closes the door, leaves the latch loose for the cat, and walks the sandy path home. The forest makes the kind of dark that does not argue. Needles breathe. Water keeps counting. The morning walks beside him like an old friend. He carries a frame over one shoulder with 9 wax cakes tied in pairs, and one resting alone like a small son. A jar of honey rides in a reed cradle against his hip. The path to the monastery lifts out of the pines and opens to rye stubble and low stone. Geese talk in the field with the same opinion they had yesterday. At the gatehouse a little bell waits on a hook. He taps it once with his knuckle. The porter looks up from a bench where he mends a shoe, recognizes both man and wax, and waves him through. The candle room sits near the kitchen, so warm water is never far. Beeswax lives there the way flour lives near ovens, useful, respected, ordinary. Inside, the air is honey sweet and clean. An iron pot set in a ring of bricks holds wax the color of straw tea. A shallow pan of water sits beside it for tempering and for safe hands. On a trestle, a wooden yoke with 2 notch-rails waits to carry wicks. The monk who minds this room is neat as a shelf. He greets the beekeeper with a nod that includes the pot, the ledger, and the day. Business first, but not brisk. The cakes are weighed on a balance that remembers fairness. The monk cuts a mark in his tablet with a stylus and reads back the line from last visit, finger-riding the grooves. Payment is in the usual goods: a coil of good linen thread, a small bag of salt, a flask of lamp oil for the beekeeper's shed, and a promise of reading if a letter comes from a cousin upriver. They add one more thing this time, because Autumn walks closer, a length of wool cloth to wrap the man's waist under the climbing rope when cold makes bark bite harder. While the ledger dries, the beekeeper stays to help with a casting. He ties 8 short wicks to the yoke, 2 to a stick, pairs like little bridges. Dipping is a patient rhythm. The wicks go down into warm wax, rise, and hang over the pan's lip to think. Down again, up again, on and on, each pass laying a thin coat that cools to firmness. After a while, the wicks have become candles, still slender, reeds that remember water. He smooths a small ridge with wet fingers, a trick taught to him here. The monk trims the heads with a thumbnail so they will light without complaint. The smell of bees and summer stands up from the pot and asks for no attention. They set the dipped pears across a pole to finish pale and straight. For the church they will make thicker ones by pressing warm sheets around a stout wick, sheet wax rolled smooth with a round of wood until the seam hides. The beekeeper watches the monk fix a tiny lead weight at the end of a new wick so it will hang true in the next dipping. Such small help keeps flame polite on winter mornings when hands are cold and not many words are wanted. He keeps back 3 of his own cakes and borrows a corner of the room to cast household lights. From a gourd he uncoils the linen wicks he twisted yesterday and knots them to his small crossbar. Dip, lift, rest. He makes 6, slim as little fingers, for nights when mending needs a friendlier light than rushes can give. He pours a spoon of wax into a shallow dish and presses the foot of each candle in turn, making a stand. When they cool, he wraps them in linen kept just for this cloth that smells faintly of smoke and soap and thyme. Before leaving, he oils the hinge on the candle-room's shutter with a bead from the lamp flask. The monk raises 2 fingers in thanks and returns to his weighings. Out in the court, bread cools on a board, and the baker's door sighs on leather hinges. The beekeeper eats a heel with a pinch of salt and a mouth of well water, then takes the path home with the wool length under his arm. Back in the yard, tools step forward for attention. The climbing belt lies on the bench, a broad strap of leather and bast that has known resin, sun, and a winter or 2. He warms it with his hands and a breath near the fire, then rubs in tallow until the surface drinks no more. At the buckle he slits a new pin of horn through the loop, smoother than the old iron and kinder in frost. He checks the stitching along the belt's edge and runs fresh waxed thread through places where summer asked too much. The thread seats into its neighbors and looks as if it grew there. The rope gets its own care. He shakes it out long so twists can leave. He feels along its lave for hard spots where sap or dirt taught stiffness. He works them loose with his thumbs and a dab of oil. The splice at mid-length takes a whipping of fresh linen twine, neat turns marching together like a well-bundled reed. Wooden steps, sanded yesterday, receive a new coat of thin pine pitch on their ends where water likes to stay. He drills one new hole through a step that had developed a hairline crack, puts in a wooden trunnel, and trims it flush so nothing snags. The rope ladder, rolled again, lies calm. Weather asks for small preparations. He walks to the nearest hives and listens with his ear at each plug. The sound says contentment, not crowded, not anxious. He narrows to entrances with slips of wood, making the doorway easier to guard when nights grow long. Round one tree that stands in a windy reach, he ties a windbreaker sheet of wicker that once stood as a fence panel lashed to 3 stakes so the north breath goes around instead of through. He tucks a handful of straw into a shallow hollow above one door where rain made a habit of pausing. A smear of clay and pine pitch along a seam answers a question before it can be asked. He cuts a shallow channel with his spade on the uphill side of a trunk so a storm's brief river will run past and not make a small lake at the foot. In a lean-to near the yard he sets birch bark in a dry stack. When snow decides to visit, the fire will want dry hands. He gathers herbs that help smoke in cold weather: mugwort, a little thyme dried on a string, and shavings of old applewood saved after a neighbor trimmed a tree. Not much. The best smoke is always the smallest story. In the shed he tests the little mirror on its stick, wiping its face with a scrap until it catches light without fuss. He checks the clay smoke pot for cracks by tapping it with a fingernail. It answers with a true ring. The bone knife's edge meets the trader's stone briefly, and thanks it by growing quiet sharp again. He strips a narrow band of bast from the length he traded for earlier, so tomorrow's plug can have a fresh binding at the lip where winter fingers will press. Afternoon thins. High geese pass in a thin row, one line, then another, each practicing the letter they will write next month across the sky. The beekeeper notes their height and direction without drama. He turns the small candles he made on the pole so the last cool reaches all sides, then wraps them in linen and tucks them into a wooden box with a sliding lid. On the inside of the lid he has rubbed a pinch of beeswax so it runs smoothly and smells like summer when opened. He tries the belt over the new wool and under his jacket, shifts the buckle until it lies where bone prefers, and leans back into the rope to see if the slide still obeys a hip. It does not. The steps bite in the air the way they will bite in bark. He nods to no one and sets them down. As evening begins, he pours a little warm wax what clung to the pot into a small shallow lamp he carved from soft wood. A short wick drinks. The flame stands quiet. He writes a mark on the doorpost with charcoal, 3 small lines, and a long so tomorrow's plan can find him in the gray before speech. He hangs the rope by its peg, closes the shed with the latch loose for the cat, and looks at the tops of the pines. They move a little, just enough to speak of weather that will be fair enough for one more good climb before rain. Supper is simple. He breaks bread, dips it into a spoon of honey taken from the jar to close the day with what the day gave, and eats with his hands warm over the wooden lamp. Pine smell, wax scent, wool against his waist, tools at peace. These are the small sums a season keeps. Dawn arrives with a light that knows its manners. The air's cooler on the wrist. He steps from the shed with the rope over his shoulder and the belt around his wool-wrapped waist. A shallow cloud bank rests on the horizon like folded linen. He reads it as a hint. One more quiet harvest before rain teaches the forest to whisper differently. He chooses 3 trees that face the first sun, and stand on higher ground. The first holds his mark, the circle with a small tail, clean and honest near the old scar. He lays out the tools as always: smoke pot, ladder steps, basket, birch cones, and sets a coal into the clay belly. A breath, then another, and smoke threads upward, not urgent, not lazy. The climb is familiar and kindly. Bark presses through the belt. The rope's broad band leans into him like a palm between friends. At the oval mouth he rests, listening to the hive's single note. It is low and even, the sound of work without quarrel. He tilts a little smoke inward, counts his two breaths, and watches bees settle deeper, as if the hollow had become a warm sleeve. He lifts the woven plug and sets it under his elbow. With paddle and bone knife he opens the season's last sweet door. The comb he chooses is pale at its caps, heavy near the edge, the kind that keeps well in the cool months. He trims the seam where wax joins wood, supports the slab with the paddle, and lays it into a linen cradle he has tied to the rope at his hip. He takes no more than a third from this hollow. Winter belongs to the bees first. He smooths a roughness with the paddle's back so the hive will forget his hand quickly. He checks the inner walls with the little mirror, dry and neat, dark with old propolis, good. He lowers the linen bundle to the ground and secures it in the basket with a slip of bast. Before reseating the plug, he warms a strip of pitch in his palm and presses it along a seam that learned to gape in the heat. A gentle twist of the straw dome, and it finds home with the sound he likes best, half crunch, half sigh. At the second tree, above a low swell, the hive's voice is higher, a touch thinner. He knows this family has worked longer on brood and less on honey. He lifts only a small piece, no more than a hand and a half, and leaves the rest as a statement of trust. At the mouth he narrows the opening with a wedge of bark slipped under the plug's edge, so cold air will ask permission rather than stride in. He ties a thin straw mat above the cut to turn rain away. A mark goes at the foot of the trunk, 3 short, then 1 long, to tell his winter self what his summer self knew. The third tree stands where two paths think about crossing. A wood ant line runs near the base like a thin string. He steps wide of their journey and climbs. The hollow is strong with honey scent. Here he uses the birch cones, because the cone runs long and prefers a firm hold. He fills 1 cone, and then a second, tying each with bast so the join sits tight. He leaves a small crescent of capped cells near the outer curve as a gift back. Bees remember kindness, as well as people. Before closing, he checks the roof for damp and coats a thin crack with softened propolis. When his hand leaves, the hollow smells more of resin and less of hen. Back on the ground he sets each cone in a nest of sedge, covers the basket with a lid, and tightens its cord. He drinks from his wooden cup and eats a slice of bread with a thumb of salt, the simple meal that keeps hands steady. The sky has climbed, the cloud bank lifting and spreading, a sheet being shaken by slow arms. He plans the afternoon, rendering wax in small pans, setting honey to settle, sealing 2 hives against a draft he felt last week. At the yard he builds a quiet fire, no taller than his wrist. The wide-bellied pot takes water, not to boil, only to be helpful. The shallow pan above receives broken comb, honey slips away and rests in the water below like calm light. He ladles it through linen into clay jars and wipes their rims with a wet cloth, the motion so practiced it happens without speaking to the hand. Each jar gets a leather lid tied with narrow bark. the knot flattened in front so winter fingers can persuade it open without waking the house. A smear of warm wax along the seam persuades the lid to be faithful. Wax floats pale in the upper pan. He lifts it, lets it firm on a board, and presses it into round molds rubbed with fat. Stamped cakes cooling on a shelf make a quiet parade. He saves the last small bits, the crumbs the size of fingernails, because crumbs become wicks or seals, and nothing that once knew bees should be lost. Sealing hives comes next. He walks the row of trunks with a basket of small helps, plugs he wove yesterday, straw mats, a pouch of propolis, a knife, a strip of bark. At one mouth he fits a new plug, twisting and pressing until straw and wood become neighbors. At another he pastes a smear of clay and pitch into a corner that like to sip rain. Where an entrance feels to open, he slides a chip of wood under the plug to make a winter doorway no wider than to bees. He cuts a shallow runnel above a foot where water used to loiter, so storm water will choose a different gain. Each tree receives a touch of the hand, and the hand learns something in return: tone, smell, a drift of air, the grain of resin under the thumb. He tallies as he goes, not on paper but on bark and bone. A thin notch near his mark for visited, a second notch for sealed, a tiny cross for leave well alone until spring. The forest keeps the ledger in its skin. For himself he writes a line on a sliver of birch and tucks it into the shed door lintel marks that only he reads, 3 uprights for 3 trees, a dot on the second to say less honey, a curled stroke over the third to say remember the ants. Afternoon cools. He renders a last small pan of wax and pours a lampful for evening work. He twists 2 more wicks from linen, rolling them on his palm with ash water until they remember their shape. He tests one in a shallow wooden lamp. It burns with a low, even flame, the kind that makes sewing easy and silence easier. Rain arrives as a practice, not yet a habit. First drops that test leaves, then a steady shift. The yard smells like pine and clean earth. He shifts jars into the shed, spreads a cloth over the cooling cakes, and hangs the rope to dry with space between corals. The ladder steps lean wood to wood, pleased with their simple geometry. Before dark, he walks once more among the trees. At each hive he puts his ear near the plug. The notes are different now, rounded, low, with a slow heart. He speaks a sentence he has spoken for years, the same every time, not a charm, not a petition, only a statement of respect. Then he goes home by a path that keeps his feet above roots when the forest chooses to be wet. Supper is rye and onion, and a spoon of honey eaten near the warm mouth of the small stove. He winds thread on a bone spool and patches a pocket. The candle he dipped at the monastery burns with a friendly voice that says the day did its work and that night knows what to do. When he sets the stub out, the wick smokes once and agrees to forget. By the door he draws 3 short marks, and along with a coal stub, then blows the coal out and pinches it safe. The marks will still be there in the first light when a new round begins, and later, when the forest wears white and bees dream in their warm, humming dark. From the cool breath of the pines and the patient talk of ropes and straw, we now travel and hurry to a tiled courtyard in Cashin, where wool dye and steady hands turn knots into a quiet garden on a loom. Before the first bow, the workshop is a dim, kind room that smells of wood shavings, warm glue, and a hint of ash. A shutter hangs open a hand's width. Cool air comes in, tasting of stone and the quiet street. On a low bench, a wooden panel waits under a linen cloth. Its surface has been dressed 4 days, layers of chalk gesso brushed on with care, each coat dried, each coat smooth with a piece of pumice, until the touch finds only cloud. The painter arrives without hurry. His wool robe whispers up the knees. A small brazier glows in the corner, coals folded into themselves, ready to lend a slow heat to glue and breath. He lifts the linen and reveals the panel. It is smooth and pale, the edges chamfered, the back crossed with two shallow battens to teach the wood to stay true. He rests his left palm on the surface, not to press, only to learn its temperature. It is cool, not good. Gesso likes to wake slowly. On a side table, a wooden box holds small dishes made from seashells. Inside them colors sleep beneath a film of water, azurite, the blue of a jar's shadow, green malachite quiet as wet grass, red cinnabar, steady and ripe, and a brown made from earth rubbed through cloth. Nearby a bowl of egg yolk and water waits, the mixture beaten till silk. The yolk has given up its skin and become a clear, golden binder. A little wine vinegar sits ready to remind each pigment how to live in the brush. He begins with the ground that teaches gold to shine. In a tiny pot, red bull earth colored by iron, and time has been mixed with a little glue. He dips a round brush, turns it against the pot's lip, and lays the bowl in thin, even coats where halos and bright ornaments will sit. The color is not loud. It is warm and deep, like a blush under skin. After each pass, he warms the bowl with breath and the gentle plane of his palm. The touch brings a faint, glad sheen. Under gold, this red will whisper fire. On a leather pad called a cushion, squares of gold leaf rest under a clean parchment guard. The sheets are thin enough to tremble at a whisper. He trims one with a knife so sharp the leaf hardly notices it has been parted. A squirrel hair gilder's tip soft, flat, and narrow waits beside the pad. He runs the tip through his hair once, the way his master taught him, to charge it with the small kindness that lifts gold without fear. The bowl, now tacky with breath warmth, calls for its light. He inhales, sets the tip near the leaf, and the gold rises as if it preferred to be held. He carries it over the halo's circle and exhales. The leaf settles like a quiet snowfall. A second sheet follows, and a third, each overlapping by the width of a hair. Where the leaf bridges a curve, he coaxes it with a fine badger brush that knows how to persuade without scolding. A fault line appears, a tiny crease as thin as a thread. He touches it with breath, and it melts into its neighbor, as though it had always lived there. He waits. Gold enjoys a pause. While it settles, he mixes the first color, an underpainting for flesh that is not pink, but olive green. This may seem unusual now, but in his world, light grows from cool shadow. He grinds the pigment in a small shell with a drop of egg, a drop of water, and a sigh of vinegar. The brush sable, fine as whisker, drinks a little and points itself. He returns to the gold. With a burnisher of polished agate, he strokes the leaf in small arcs. The stone hums against the bowl. Under pressure, the metal awakens, not to glare, but to a soft, living shine that follows him like a tame flame. He lifts the panel and finds the sun. The first slant of day peeks through the shutter and lays a thin ribbon across the bench. The gold takes it and makes it round. Lines come next. He draws them lightly in charcoal, the way voice draws melody before words. An oval for a face, a long, quiet nose, the curve of a brow, the thin, attentive mouth. hands that bless, a palm open, fingers slender, joints marked with tiny ovals that will later glow with light. A border finds itself to lines close together, ready for red, and a string of small dots that will read as pearls when the day is older. He wets a rag with warm water and softens the gesso's tiniest dust at the panel's edge. A clean edge takes paint kindly. He tests the green flesh tone on the panel's margin, where a border will later hide it. It dries fast, eggs way with air. He nods once, not for anyone, only for the day. He lays in the first broad shapes, thin washes that behave like breathing. Shadow under the brow ridge, along the nose's side, beneath the lower lip and chin, in the hollow of the neck where the collar will lie. The green is not an end, it is the earth in which light will be planted. His brush returns to the shell for a little more, thins it with a drop, then lays another veil. He does not hurry. Egg temper prefers many thin voices to one loud one. On a stool, a boy apprentice, silent, eager, beats glue in a small pot to keep it friendly. He sets a length of linen to dry on a cord, cloth that will become a backing for another small panel. He watches the master's wrist, the angle of breath, the way a brush is wiped on a folded rag in the same place each time so order can find itself tomorrow. The room speaks in gentle ticks, wood creaking as it adjusts to warmth, coal shifting in the brazier, bristles whispering across a ground that feels like polished shell. The painter's own breath is slow and even. He mouths a prayer as a habit, not to ask, only to keep the rhythm learned from those who sat where he sits now. He lifts azurite from its shell and mixes a robe's first blue. Egg binds it into a velvet skin. He carries it to the panel and lays a thin coat within the drawn border, leaving a hairline of gesso to keep a clear seam against gold. The blue dries to a grain like fine sand. He smooths it with a badger brush's light sweep. Another coat will follow, and another, each one teaching depth to a flat world. He glances at the gold once more. Along the halo's inner edge, he incises a circle with a needle held like a pen, not cutting deep, only a suggestion. Tiny stars will be pressed later with a punch, each dot like a bright bead. For now the circle is enough, true to the compass pricked through a paper pattern onto the gesso 2 days ago. The apprentice brings warm water and sets it by the shells. The painter wets his brush, rings it with 2 fingers, and draws the first thin line of brown to mark the eye's upper lid. It is not eyeliner, it is quiet attention. He adds a breath of white to the iris's near side, not as a glint, only as air. The face remains mostly green. Light will come to it the way dawn arrives by degrees. Outside, the vendor's wooden wheels murmur over the stones. Somewhere in the next room, someone turns pages that smell of glue and incense. In this one, gold, egg, and earth make a small and steady world. The room is a little brighter now. Light through the narrow shutter makes a thin gold plank on the floorboards. Dust floats in it like tiny, slow birds. The panel lies quiet on the bench, halo sheeted in metal that remembers mountains and rivers before it learned to be leaf. The painter reaches for a small bundle of tools, punches with tips shaped like dots, rings, little stars, and short petals. Their handles are smooth from many mornings. He lays a strip of leather on the gold to rest his wrist, so skin will not mar what breath has set down. With a bone compass he finds the halo's center again, touches the needle to the bowl through the leaf just enough to mark a point that only he will see. On that point he works in patient circles, tapping the dot punch with a light hammer. The sound is barely there, like a bee knocking politely on a window. Each tap leaves a tiny well that drinks light differently from the flat. A second ring follows, then a third, this time alternating dots and little petals. No hurry. Tooling is counted by breaths. He changes to the star and sets for small bursts along the inner edge, north, south, east, west. Between them, he taps a fine broken line, almost a whisper, so the halo shows depth without noise. When he lifts the panel to look, the gold no longer feels like a flat coin. It seems to turn like a shallow bowl. Tooling, like prayer, teaches space to feel alive. Along the halo's inner border, he incises a hairline circle with an agate stylus. The leaf parts in a clean, bright groove. That line will catch light when the face is dark, like a rim of water at dusk. Satisfied, he lays the tools back on their cloth and returns the leather wrist-rest to its peg. The green underpainting of the flesh has dried to a quiet olive. He sets two shells together on the table, one with yellow earth ochre, the color of warm straw, and one with lead white, ground fine yesterday and kept under a skin of water. He mixes a little of both with egg and a touch of water, making a pale, warm milk of color. In the language of his shop, this is the first light. He loads a narrow brush and tests it at the panel's edge where border red will later live. He begins on the forehead, where light tends to visit first, thin strokes, each like a thread, laid in the direction a hand might smooth skin, across the brow ridge, down the bridge of the nose, on the cheekbones, along the top of the chin, over the neck's high places. He leaves the hollows green. The face does not change all at once, it blooms like dawn, layer upon layer. The apprentice watches how the brush, almost dry, makes soft meshes hatching, laid one way, then another like fine cloth. A second mixture, a little richer, more white, more ochre. He lays this within the first, stepping inward, smaller and brighter. Now the eyelids gather a faint light. The nose finds a thin line along its ridge. The lips receive a soft warmth, not red but a kinder brown, touched with a memory of cinnabar. The lower lip catches a tiny crescent. Under the eyes, a pale veil curves to suggest the glow beneath. The green still shows at the edges. It is not a mistake in this manner of painting. Coolness teaches warmth where to sit. He pauses to explain, not with many words, but with a simple sentence the apprentice has heard before. Light is added, not invented. He shows how the first lights are broad and low, the next smaller and higher, each one a step toward a final whisper that will be almost white. The boy nods and grinds, more white, slow and even. Stones circling show with a soft, sandy murmur. The robe waits in blue. Yesterday's azurite has dried to a chalky sky. Egg tempera likes to be coaxed. He mixes a fresh batch azurite and a grain's weight of black to cool it and lays another thin coat, steady within his penciled border, leaving a breathing line of gesso against the gold. When that dries quicker than oil would, he returns with the comb-like badger brush and smooths the green to a suede evenness. He adds shadow under the fold and rises from the shoulder, under the elbow's valley, along the side where the body turns away from the room. These shadows are not heavy, they are simply places where air is thicker. With a finer brush and a darker blue he draws the fold lines, hatching them in pairs where cloth would creases on itself. The apprentice brings a yardstick straight. With a lip hand the painter lays it to guide a red border round the panel's edge. The red is minium, warm as brick, egg-bound and calm. Two lines run around the icon, close as companions, true to the wood's geometry. Between them, with a round-tipped stick, he places a procession of white dots. From arm's length, they will read as tiny beads set in the border, quiet ornament for a quiet frame. He returns to the face, a third light, now milkier. His hand is slower. The places grow smaller, corner of the brow, turn of the nostril, tip of the chin, notch above the upper lip, to tiny strokes in the inner corner of each eye, where the tear sits when it thinks. The face turns from mask to attention. He does not strive for likeness of any person he has known. He aims for the calm type his teachers taught him, the still human that carries more than one story. This restraint is not coldness, it is a way of leaving room. At the throat he lays a small shadow under the jaw, then a thread of light along the Adam's apple. The hand that blesses receives its first lights on knuckle hills and fingernail moons. Joints are marked with small almond shapes, green holding to the sides, lights easing up the middle. The palm is warmed with a thin wash of earth, then crossed with 3 faint lines that will not be read, only felt. He mixes cinnabar with a breath of white and the smallest touch of ochre, then tests a diluted wash on the cheek. It is just enough to suggest blood under skin. Over it, he returns with the previous light to keep the cheek from shouting. In this work, if a color grows bold, it is tamed not by scolding but by laying patience over it. The gold wants one more kindness. With the thinnest brush he draws a hairline round the halo where it meets the blue-brown, not black so the metal will feel set, not floating. Then, using a reed pen and thin brown paint, he writes small letters at the top corners that will later be strengthened in red, abbreviations known to his city, names that mark the holy as you mark a door. He pricks guideline dots with a needle so the letters sit even, turning each stroke with breath at the end to keep edges soft. The apprentice sets 2 cups on the table, warm water, and a scrap of bread with olives. They eat in working silence, bread pulled by thumb and first finger or traced on crumb with a corner of fruit. The painter wipes his hands on a linen rag, then on his robe's inner hem, a habit he tells the boy not to learn and which the boy will learn anyway. Before he returns to the panel, he sharpens a goose quill with a small knife. The blade's edge whispers through hollow shaft. He tests the nib on a shard of gesso-coated wood, drawing lines that grow from hair to thread with pressure. The quill will be for inscriptions and for the fine patterning that sits on garments in quiet rooms, little ladders, and nets that catch light. He checks the face again from a step back. The green still hums in the hollows. Light sits softly. The mouth does not smile, but neither does it refuse you. Good. He mixes the 4th light, mostly white now, and sets the tiniest touches. A point at the bridge of the nose, a grain on the lower lip's curve, pinhead glints at the tops of fingers, the rim of the eyelid's arch. These are not sparkles, they are places where breath pauses. By the window, a pigeon lands and mutters to itself. A neighbor's bucket rope creaks at a well. The brazier settles with a sigh. He lays the brush down and lets the panel rest. Egg and earth enjoy being left alone as much as they enjoy being used. The light has climbed the wall and settled in the high corner like a perched bird. The panel rests on 2 sticks so air can pass beneath. Paint appreciates a small breeze. The painter rubs his fingertips together to feel for dust, then wipes them on the linen rag folded thrice. He leans close again, patient as water. Garments come first today. The blue robe has dried to a calm sky. The undershadows have told it where to fold. He mixes a deeper tone azurite with a touch more black, and the smallest drop of brown. With a long, soft brush he lays narrow hatchings along the shadow side of each pleat, lines close together, then a little apart, then close again like breathing. Where two folds meet, he crosses the hatching lightly, so cloth feels layered rather than cut. The strokes follow the imagined weight of wool, down from shoulder to elbow, from elbow to wrist. He pauses to look from arm's length. The robe is still quiet. Good. Pattern should help the eye, not lead it by the nose. He prepares a lighter blue for the upper ridges azurite with a pearl of white. These he hatches in the opposite direction, rising up the foal's crest, strokes short and even, almost dry. The robe finds a slow shimmer where light would walk. Between light and shadow he leaves a small seam of the middle blue, so the eye can rest. Egg temper rewards this kind of restraint. Little is lost, much is hinted. On the table, a tiny shell holds shell gold, ground leaf mixed with a breath of honey and washed of sweetness, then kept with gum to ask it to be paid. He wets it with a drop of water, stirring until it turns to quiet liquid metal. This is for assists the fine gold threads that live along a foal's highest thought, or the turn of a hem where holiness is suggested by brightness, not by trumpet. He tests the brush point on a scrap, then lifts the panel to the window's better light. With his wrist steadied on a padded rest, he runs the gold line where the robe rises most, a tender arc from collar to shoulder, a short flick across the chest, a brief stroke along the forearm. The lines are thin as hair, not a fence, only a breath. When they dry, they will catch lamp glow in a room where someone keeps vigil. That is their work. He turns to the Homation, the outer mantle mixed from red earth and a little madder, cooled with black. It has waited until the blue could answer. He lays the broad color into passes, then gathers its folds with darker hatching, letting corners soften where cloth would sag. On edges and hems he paints a narrow ornamental band, first a line of minion, then inside it a chain of tiny lozenges in white, measured with the tip of a reed. At this period, he explains to the apprentice, patterning on garments is not fashion but memory, a way of recalling a woven border in a painted world. The boy nods and counts the lozenges under his breath, not to rive, only to keep even time. Hair waits in brown earth. He mixes umber with a small sip of black, binds it with egg, and lays the mass with a flat brush, the main shape first, not looking for hairs, only for the quiet heel the hairs belong to. When it dries to velvet, he adds warmth, earth yellow, and a little red in thin strokes that follow the curve of growth, temple to nape, crown to shoulder. He leaves darker seams where locks would meet. Last, with a brush touch to shell gold, he lifts 3 or 4 slim lights at the temples, and across a curl that bends to the ear. They are not loud. They are the way sun remembers hair. The eyes receive their second attention. He darkens the upper lid's line a little brown, never black, and sets a finer one for the lower, broken at the center so the wetness can breathe. The iris remains quiet, more brown than bright. A mustard fleck at the lower edge suggests life without sparkle. A dot that might become a highlight is refused. This face prefers composure. He softens the inner corners with a warm glaze, as if blood simply lives there. Hands are careful work. He smooths a thin veil of warm earth over the green and first lights laid before, then returns with small ladders of white tucker hatching up each finger. Knuckles gain tiny oval lights. The nails receive pale crescents at their moons, then a breath of shadow where they meet skin. The thumb pad glows with a wider stroke to suggest softness. He turns the wrist with a single shadow under the sleeve. Veins are not drawn, a cold glaze hints at them, and leaves the rest to kindness. From time to time he closes his own hand and opens it again, feeling where bones rise. Painting in this workshop is partly memory of touch. He starts border ornaments while the garments rest. The two red rules are dry. Between them he paints a quiet meander, small right-angle turns that walk along the frame like a thoughtful river. He keeps it faint, a stone path under grass. At the panel's outer edge he plants for circles with a compass and fills them with tiny crosses in white. They will sit at the corners like rivets, making the painted world feel built. Inscriptions return. He sets the panel upright and, with the sharpened quill, redraws his guide dots where charcoal had faded. He mixes a calm red cinnabar tamed with a little white and writes the customary abbreviations his city knows, small as a thumbnail, above the shoulders. The quill's nib kisses and lifts, each stroke ending in a soft tail where pressure eases. He wipes the nib often on a folded rag so the letters do not flood. On the lower border he adds a line in brown. A date by indiction, a scribe's note that will mean more to a clerk than to a pilgrim. In this period, words are not signatures of pride, they are labels of service. He rests his hand and lets the apprentice try a letter on a gesso shard. The boy's first line blots, the second sits upright. The painter smiles at the improvement and turns the shard over so tomorrow will also have room for practice. Back to the face, he prepares the fifth like mostly white, carried on a brush nearly dry. Faint touches now, no longer lines, but points, two on each brow, one at the nose's tip, one on the lower lip, one where the cheek's light would be the last to leave at dusk. He taps each, not drags. The face deepens without growing louder. This way of building from green to gold warm light may seem contrary to later habits, he notes gently, but here the path runs from stillness toward presence, never the other way. A few gold assists go into the hair, and on the mantle's border short ticks that do not pretend to be thread, just reminders of care. He breathes on the shell gold to keep it willing. The room holds its breath with him. When he exhales smiles, the boy smiles too, though he does not quite know why. The painter shifts to the halo again. With a very fine brush he paints a line of transparent brown along the inner rim where the head meets the light, then feathers it into the hair with a finger. The gold steps back by the width of a whisper, the head steps forward. Space is created without pushing. He stands and stretches his back. The small brazier gets a nudge, and Nicole slides to a warmer seat. He rinses brushes, pinches their points, and lays them flat on a clean cloth so hairs will sleep aligned. He pulls the gauze cover over the panel against dust and folds the linen partly back so air can move. The apprentice covers the shells and sets the quill in a clay stand with its point upward, like a reed by a river. They listen. In the alley beyond, a donkey's hoof finds a hollow in the stone and learns it. In the next room, a page turns again, a kettle remembers it was warm, and sighs. Work that is meant to last appreciates being unhurried. Midday light has thinned to a soft wash. The panel breathes under its gauze cover like a sleeping bird. When the cloth lifts, the gold seems calmer, as if it has finished speaking and is ready to listen again. Today the painter tends to quiet luxuries, ornaments that sit close to the body, and small geometry that tells the eye where it stands. He begins with the garment borders. The mantle's red edge already holds a fine line and a chain of tiny lozenges. Now he places pearls along the collar, small dots of thick white, each the size of a poppy seed, set with the spacing taught by his master's master. He turns the panel a little so the brush can approach without strain. Dot, breathe, lift. Dot, breathe, lift. Once dry, each bead receives a grain of shell gold at its upper left edge, the briefest crescent. From a distance the color will carry a hush of light, not a ring of noise. He mixes a brown gold wash ochre, a sigh of red, and a brush tip of shell gold and drags it very thinly along ends and the inside of a fold, a glaze that warms without drawing attention. This is not gilding, it is hospitality for cloth. The apprentice watches the angle of the brush and how little liquid sits in its belly. Temper forgives almost everything except impatience. On the table, a small stack of punches lies in order. He chooses the flower head with 5 petals, taps it in a sparse rhythm along the halo's outer ring, leaving little blossoms that no one will count but everyone will feel. Between them, he returns to the dot punch and sets pairs of points, like footsteps beside a road. He knows when to stop. Ornament must never chase the face from the room. Now for the space around the figure. Many icons of his time keep an unbroken gold ground, but sometimes a low wall or a stylized building appears, not as scenery, but as a sign of place. He pricks to guide points with a needle and draws, with diluted brown, the simplest of architectures, a pale, stepped platform to the left, and behind it a small, abstracted doorway suggested by 2 upright strokes and a lintel that leans a little, the way roofs in old cities do. The lines are thin as threads. He lightens the side toward the gold with a veil of white, darkens the opposite with a wash of brown. It reads like a memory more than a structure, enough to let the viewer's mind rest its back against something. The seat under the figure becomes a cushion of color rather than a throne. 2 rectangles, one of dull green, one of earthen red, separated by a hairline of white. He cross-hatches their near edges so they sit on the ground rather than float. A narrow shadow falls onto the gold under the cushion's front, a faint brown feathered with a finger until it becomes simply a gentler gold. He steps back and squints. The figure now inhabits the panel without being trapped by it. He returns to the flesh. 4 lights have climbed the face, the last will be almost nothing, a breath of lead-white tinged with the tiniest snow of yellow earth. He dries the brush on the cloth until it is nearly forgetful of paint, then touches the brow ridge with 3 pinpoints, the very tip of the nose with 1, the cupid's bow with a grain, the cheek's highest round with another that is hardly there. On each finger a note of brightness stands at the nail's rim. These are called spark touches in the shop speech, though no flame lives in them, only steadiness. The face turns fully toward attention, without losing its gentleness. Hair receives a second kindness. Thin lines of warm yellow earth laid along earlier strokes, like sun coming through shutters. The beard, if there is one, gets tiny squares of light along the chin where hairs catch in groups. Around the ear, he darkens the hollow slightly to return it to the head's curve. He softens the join between hair and forehead with a coal glaze, so no hard border scolds the eye. The apprentice sets out the reed pen again, and the painter tests it on a gesso shard. Satisfied, he strengthens the upper corner abbreviations in calm red, then adds 2 tiny crosses in white at their ends. On the lower border he writes a brief dedication in brown, a prayer of N for his mother, Bien, to be filled when the patron's name is brought by the clerk. He spaces the words as though placing seeds in a garden room between rumara. A small geometry lesson appears on the garment. Over the blue, he lays an almost invisible lattice in pale gray, repeating a motif from woven cloth, a net of inch-long lines that break near folds and rejoin. Never perfect. Where the lattice crosses light, he leaves gaps so the shimmer can speak. The apprentice asks, "Why paint a weave when we already paint folds?" The painter answers softly, "Because hands remember thready, even when eyes don't." He turns to the halo one last time and sets 3 short, vertical incised strokes at its very top, spaced like breath. Some households keep this habit, 3 as a sign of sanctity's grammar. He does not insist on it as law. He adds it here because the panel asks for a small sobriety. Now comes a moment of restraint that feels like generosity. He lays a wash of the faintest warm gray around the figure's outline, just on the gold, barely there. It is not a shadow. It is a cushion of air, the thinnest separation so the body will not seem glued to the light. When it dries, the effect will vanish into clarity, the best kind of work. Sealing will not happen today. Tempera wants more than a single sun. But he prepares. He picks stray fibers from the surface with the tip of a knife. He looks along the panel at eye level, letting raking light show any raised dust. A soft feather does small work where needed. He shows the apprentice the varnish jar, resin dissolved and guarded from dust, to be used in weeks, not hours. In this city some use oil carefully thickened and warmed, others a resinous spirit. In this house they bless patience first and choose resin later. Either way, the goal is the same, a thin skin that keeps breath and touch from drinking the paint, and that lends the gold a quiet depth like honey seen through glass. He sketches in air the steps to come, sun and shade turning the panel each day, the first thin varnish brushed and then breathe upon to level, the waiting. A second whisper of varnish months later if the patron can bear to wait, and perhaps a fabric cover on hinges, so hands must ask permission before eyes enter. He lifts the panel carefully and sets it upright on the easel to meet the rune. From a few paces, the figure returns the gaze without judgment. The halo's tooling speaks in murmurs, the garments breathe, the border holds like a frame of quiet hands. He and the apprentice stand a minute without words. Even the brazier seems to listen. He lowers the cover again to keep dust from inventing itself. Brushes are washed in warm water and soap, rinsed, pinched to points, and set flat on a clean board. Shells are topped with drops of water, gilding tools wrapped in their cloth, punch tips wiped with a touch of oil to keep them from tarnish. The room returns to order as the day leans toward evening. From the alley comes a cart's rubbered silence, fresh straw perhaps, or clean sacks. Overhead, a pigeon decides that roof tile is preferable to air and lands like a dropped question. The painter taps the tabletop once with 2 fingers, a habit that means enough in this place. He smiles at the apprentice. Tomorrow we let it look back at us again. The boy nods, gathers the rags, and drapes a clean linen over the bench. The panel waits, radiant but modest, as if it prefers to be found rather than shown. Morning returns with a gentler hand. The gauze cover lifts, and the panel looks rested, as if sleep had smoothed its thoughts. The painter sets it upright on the easel and lets a ribbon of raking light cross the surface. Gold answers first, then blues and reds, then the small, quiet whites. Final work begins with looking. He walks the panel from left to right, top to bottom, like reading a familiar page. Where a robe's edge touches gold, he finds a thread of paint that crept too far. He does not scold it. He picks up a dry point, just a polished needle set in wood, and draws the line back to where it belongs, lifting a whisper of color. A soft brush carries the crumb away. On the halo's inner rim he corrects one wobble with a single, careful arc, making roundness true again. Dry point is not noise, it is tidy breath. He warms a little egg and water with his palm and mixes a veil of warm earth for the cheeks, so green and light, merry without edge. Over the throat he lays a cooler glaze, thin as air, to help the head stand from the neck with kindness. In the blue robe he washes a darker tone into two folds near the elbow, so they speak to each other from shadow to shadow. The brush is nearly dry. A second pass is only the suggestion of a second pass. Temper rewards restraint. Shell gold returns for a brief visit. Overnight, tiny tool marks and the sleeve's accidental touch have dulled a few threads. He roots the shell and coaxes a hairline along the collar's highest thought, taps to points on a fold that holds like a cupped hand, and leaves the rest to time. He breathes gently across the leaf while it is still damp. The surface settles like water after a pebble. A clerk arrives with a folded paper. It carries the patron's small request, written in quick hand, and the mother's name, as promised. The painter opens the lower border where he left space. With the sharpened quill and a red tempered to calm, he writes the line in letters that neither crowd nor shy away. He dots the ends with white to keep the row from running off the board. The ink dries in moments. Egg remembers to be ready for that. He inspects nails and knuckles, adding one grain of pale to the ring finger, then softening it with a fingertip so the shine does not announce itself. In the eye, he lays the faintest warm line at the lower lid's edge and eases it away with a damp brush so there is moisture without sparkle. Hair receives two short strokes near the part, and the beard, if present, gains a small square of light where jaw and lips speak quietly. The apprentice holds the panel at a slant while the painter peers along the surface. Tiny fibers show themselves when light is low. He touches them away with the tip of a knife and a breath. A feather ruffles across the gold to ask dust to leave. The apprentice smiles when the feathers. Whisper sounds like a page turning. Ceiling waits until the hour when light is steady and the room has no hurry. He opens a jar kept at the back of the shelf, a thin, clear varnish made from resin kissed by oil, rested long and strained through linen. He does not stir it now. He rocks it once to wake it kindly. He tests a drop on a shard. It runs, then sits, leaving a quiet shine. Good. He breathes on the panel, not for warmth, but to feel the move of air. Then, with a broad, soft brush, he lays the varnish in lanes as narrow as his palm. Down, 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 never back and forth, so bubbles will not learn the road. Where a bead gathers at the lane's foot, he lifts it with the brush's thirsty heel. Over the gold he is light as falling ash. Over colors he is steady. A few tiny bubbles appear and then forget themselves. He leans close and breathes across the wet skin. It levels, the way a pond comes after a fish turns. They set the panel on supports so air can travel under it. The window opens the width of 2 fingers. Sun does not strike, only light does. The room smells faintly of resin, soft and clean, like worn pine. They leave it alone. The apprentice wipes the brush with oil, then soap and warm water, until the bristles remember their point. He lays the brush flat so its memory will remain straight. While it cures, they prepare the panel for travel. A sheet of clean linen, hemmed yesterday, becomes a sleeve that ties with cotton tape at the back. For small pads of wool wrap the corners beneath the cloth, so edges will not learn dents from a strap. The back receives a simple cross-strake of thin wood fixed with pegs, not nails, to keep the board modestly straight as seasons breathe. Two small rings are set at the top of the back with wooden pins, ready to accept a cord in the chapel if need asks it. A narrow leather strap will make the day's carrying easier. The apprentice tests the buckle twice. When the varnish feels like the skin of cooled honey, no longer tacky, not yet hard, they draw the sleeve up and tie the tapes. The painter adds a small postcard-sized veil over the face area inside, a habit he learned from a careful man long gone. It keeps the cloth from finding new meaning in gold. They step into the street. The panel rides against the painter's back, high and secure. The apprentice walks ahead to ask corners for space. Stone underfoot remembers many feet. Someone bakes bread, the air repeats the news. A donkey decides to stand and then decides again to walk. Two women speak of water, a cobbler's awl clicks like an insect. The painter keeps his breath even, the way he keeps a brush even. He does not hurry. Paint respects walking that understands weight. At the chapel, a small door opens from shade. Inside, the air is cool and friendly. A candle works at its wick in a red glass cup. The keeper, apron tied, nods a welcome and makes a place ready near the north wall. The panel sleeve unknots and lifts, linen whispers. Gold opens its eye and finds new light. It does not shout. It simply receives. They set it on a stand and check the straightness with ordinary eyes. A thin cord finds the back rings and a peg in the wall. The painter presses on the lower edge, gentle, testing for rock. There is none. The apprentice steps back until the figure sits with the candle and the small window in one conversation. The keeper brings a pot of incense and warms a coal with tongs. The smoke rises like a patient river. He wafts it before the panel, not as ceremony for spectacle, but as hospitality. Resin meets resin. The room smells like old wood and clean breath. A short blessing is spoken, few words, more pauses. The painter does not require thanks. He receives it and lets it pass through. He checks once more a border corner where red meets red and finds it fine. He lifts a stray thread from the floor and puts it in his pocket without thinking. Habit cares in small ways. They draw the curtain that lives on a brass rod above the panel, a simple linen fall that protects from dust, smoke, and vigorous hands. It lowers to just above the border so air can still walk. The keeper ties it with a narrow braid and smiles. It will teach stillness, he says. The painter nods. It will be taught by it, he replies, meaning himself as much as anyone. Back in the street, the strap hangs like now. The apprentice looks taller in the way of someone who has carried something between rooms of the world. They return to the workshop by a different alley, so the panel's absence can become the room's new shape. The bench clears. Shells go back in the box. The feather returns to its peg. The gilder's cushion sleeps. On the easel, an empty board waits under its first gesso coat, pale as a cloud before sun. Tomorrow will have the same tools, the same breaths, the same patience. From gold that learned to listen to breath, we will step into a high forest where ropes and smoke keep bees calm and honeykind. To travel, done arrives by steam before it arrives by light. Along the Milras, a low roof of split bamboo collects night's last coolness, and beneath it the workshop gathers itself from quiet. Water slides past with a silver sound, curved stones guiding it where it should go. A wooden sluice lifts a thin stream toward a wheel that will wake soon, but not yet. For a while, the room belongs to breaths, to dampness, to the small voices of things that remember heat. The press stands at the room's center like a patient tree, 4 square posts mortised into a base of thick timber, a crossbeam above, and through that beam the tall iron screw that turns with a slow, friendly groan. The screw has been rubbed with tallow, its thread gleams where hands have thanked it. On the platform, under the screw rests a tray lined with woven bamboo and dusted in rice flour. The flour will keep leaves from clinging in the wrong way. It smells like faint porridge, like a breakfast not meant for mouths. A boy arrives first. He is old enough to know the room's manners, and young enough to enjoy them. He checks the brazier under the steaming pan, adds a twist of pine, listens to the flames settle, and then lifts the lid just enough to release a little cloud. Tea leaves in their first softness, darkened from yesterday's withering, already pliant. He stirs them with a bamboo rake, not to hurry, only to make sure all leaves learn the same lesson. Steam coats his cheeks. He smiles as if the room has greeted him by name. The foreman steps in with a bundle of molds under one arm. The molds are frames of hardwood, their bottoms open, their inside faces smooth from years of use, their tops fitted with lids that will receive the screw's persuasion. Each mold carries a stamp carved into its lid to calm characters naming stream and hamlet. He sets them on a low shelf, then rubs his palm along the press's beam and the platform, feeling for splinters not yet there. He smooths a place with a scrap of silk and nods to himself. Wood likes to be checked before is asked to carry weight. By the door, mats of bamboo lie rolled and tied. The boy unties one, shakes it out, and lays it on a table. He dusts it lightly with rice flour from a gourd scoop, taps the scoop twice to wake the powder, then sets beside it a small brush of palm fiber for later. On another table, sheets of paper rag paper sized yesterday with rice paste soft, a little crisp, almost shy. They will wrap the bricks once they have learned how to be bricks. A brush rests in a porcelain cup near a covered pot of paste, cooled to a polite thickness. Leaves come from the steamer a basket at a time. They fall in a dark, tender heap onto the bamboo mat. The foreman lifts a handful, spreads it thin, and the leaves shine a little with moisture. He feels with the fingers pads for stems that stand to prod, those he nudges aside. The boy weighs the pile on a balance of beam and 2 pans, little brass weights sit in their box, their numbers worn by thumbs. The beam's tongue sits level, the boy taps it lightly until it agrees. Each mold will want the same weight, so the press will make the same promise each time. Ready, the boy says in a tone the room recognizes. The foreman lines a mold with a fresh mat, shakes a breath of flour across it, and then feeds the leaves into the frame. He spreads them with quick, open hands, making corners quiet and the middle modestly higher. Like a hill that knows it is being watched, He sets the lid on and slides the mold under the screw. A wooden collar fits between screw and lid so pressure will fall evenly. The foreman lifts the long handle that turns the screw, and the boy takes the other end. Together they walk the circle, not quickly, not as if to win, but in patience, counting under breath. 1, 2, 3. The screw descends. The frame creaks once, then learns to accept. Breath rises during the first squeeze, green, earthy, a little like rain in bamboo. The workshop breathes with it. The foreman pauses, lets the leaves rest under weight for the space of a short story told in his head, a stream crossing a field, a small dog refusing to get its feet wet. Rest matters. Fibers knit while thoughts wander. Then one more half-turn, a pause, and a quarter turn to finish. The handle comes to a stop, as if it has always known that spot. Pressure is not a shout. It is a hand left on a shoulder until both agree. They reverse the turns to lift the screw, and the foreman slides the mold from under. He knocks the frame's side with his knuckles twice. The sound is not hollow, not dull, something in between that means the leaves have taken their first shape. He lifts the lid, peels back the mat, and the brick lies there, still damp, edges soft, but already sure. He transfers it to a drying board, a plank with slats that invite air, and covers it with a thin cloth. Warmth and time will do the rest. The boy returns to the steamer. He rakes fresh leaves and checks the brazier's fire. He adjusts the chimney stone with 2 fingers so smoke flows where it should. From a corner shelf he brings a clay bowl of roasted rice. He eats a pinch dry, then shakes a few grains into the boy-sized pot where water will become tea later. He grins without reason. The foreman grins without showing teeth. Work that keeps its rhythm asks for little else. On the wall hang 2 narrow brooms, their bristles of split bamboo bound with twine. Between cycles, the foreman sweeps the platform so flour and leaf crumbs do not make a false layer under the next brick. He wipes the press's screw with a rag. He turns the press a quarter swing backward to keep the thread thinking kindly. Every gesture carries a lesson about tomorrow. More molds find the line. 2 women arrive with bundles of leaves tied in netted baskets that sit easy on the spine. They empty the baskets into the steamer with a practiced tilt, then take seats at the low table to sort stems from tenderness and to fan the finished bricks with palm fans and slow arcs. Their bracelets speak only when their hands are above shoulder height. Today the bracelets keep quiet. Wrapping paper waits, but not yet. Pressed bricks must shed their heat and damp little by little. The boy sets them on end along the slatted boards so air can walk both sides. He listens for a change in smell, the moment when green breath becomes a note deeper and warmer. He can name that scent's arrival by a look to the rafters. When the lowest bamboo pole no longer wears beads of steam, it is time. In the corner, a shallow pan sits over a low fire. The foreman tosses a handful of finished leaves there, not for the bricks, but for the small tea they will drink. The pan answers with a whisper, and the room shifts from working tea to drinking tea without moving its feet. The boy pours water and sets the lid. A waiting pot says nothing, the best thing a pot can sigh. At the doorway, a porter leans his frame against the jam-packed straps, crossing a chest like writing. He nods toward the stack of dried bundles near the far wall, bricks from last week, paper app, tied in 6s with split bamboo. He counts with his chin. The foreman nods. Not today, river is up. Tomorrow morning when stones show their backs again. He wipes paste on the back of one paper wrap and tests its tack with a fingertip. He writes the day's mark with a brush, a small seal in red, street name and shop name in a square. The stamp lives on a little slab of wood that keeps it straight. When paper meets brick, brush strokes will lie on the outside, a promise turned into habit. The tea in the pan is ready. He pours into small cups, 2 sips worth, maybe 3 if a person is short on words. They drink standing, the way people do when chairs are working. The liquor is warm and a little smoky. It finds the tongue and sits, not insistent, not shy. Steam from the steamer thins and then thickens again. The wheel outside finally takes its share of river and begins to turn, its paddles lifting light from water. The pressing becomes a cycle, a soft machine with human parts. Wave, flower, fill, press, pause, lift, knock, carry, set, cover. Hands learn the dance until the dance teaches the hands. Outside, the millwright speaks a little louder. Inside, the screw's friendly groan marks time, 1 brick's worth at a time, 1 morning at a time. By mid-morning the room has chosen its tempo. The screw turns with a low, even note, steam rises, and writes its short poem against the bamboo rafters. The millwright outside keeps the bass line. The boy's hands move by themselves now, flour, mat, leaves, lid, handle, while his eyes learn to see weight without the scale. The foreman lets him guess once, then checks on the beam balance. The boy's guess is a finger's width light. The foreman drops a small brass weight into the pan, and the beam levels with a content level click. Listen for that sound, he says, not unkindly. It is the sound of sameness. Stamp marks come next, the moment 1 bricks learn their names. On a low shelf by the window, 2 carved stamps rest on a slab of smooth wood. 1 reads the stream's name. 2 characters like stepping stones. The other names the shop, a square of lines steady as a field. A shallow dish holds red paste made from cinnabar and oil ground to the consistency of slow honey. The foreman takes a clean brush, wakes the paste with a circle or 2, and feeds the stamp's face until the red sits even but not thick. He tests on a scrap of paper clear and blurred and then presses the stamp to the brick's face through a thin sheet so texture will not swallow the lines. He lifts straight up. The impression sits calm, neither shouting nor fading. He stamps the second mark beneath the first, forming a small column. The boy watches the way the foreman's wrists stay soft. The mark is in the whole body, not the hand alone. Drying boards fill in rows along the wall, bricks standing on edge like quiet books. A ladder leads to a loft where rafters hold a kinder warmth. The boy climbs with 2 bricks hugged close, 1 in each crook of his arm, and sets them on a cross-slat shelf. Up here, the air is still but not stifled. A louver, the gable lets heat drift out in patient drafts. He places the bricks with 2 finger widths between them so each can breathe. He listens. There is a faint, pleasant crackle as surfaces tighten, not a complaint. More like cloth cooling after an iron. Back below, paper wraps begin. Sheets of rag paper, sized yesterday with rice paste so they will resist damp fingers, lie stacked with corners aligned. The women handle them like friendly birds winged light. Each brick, once it has cooled to the temperature of a warm palm, receives its coat, paper folded across the face, turned at the edges, tucked at corners, backside pasted and smoothed with a bamboo spatula. A brush writes on the wraps and flap, day number, press hand, and weight. The brush moves fast enough to stay wet, slow enough to stay legible. A small knot of split bamboo secures 6 bricks into a bundle. The knot is clever, a loop that can be loosened without cutting. The bundles look like little parcels of geometry. Weight must not wander as the day lengthens. The foreman checks the scales, devotion wood swells in damp, and balances get ideas. He resets the beam with the master weight, a brass square that lives in its own cloth. He tests 3 bricks at random. All are within a pinch of one another. He nods, then sets a spare weight to coins wrapped in paper by the boy's elbow for the next guesses. The boy accepts the small challenge as a game. His second guess lands true. The bean tongue kisses its notch and rests. From the door, tea broker enters without stepping fully inside, the way rivers meet ponds carefully. His robe is simple, sleeves neat. He carries his scale in a wooden case, and his opinions in a quiet voice. He opens the case to pans, a forest of small weights, a hook that gleams from use. He asks to see a brick from yesterday and one from last week. The women fetch them, hands knowing which stacks hold which day by the length of dust on the wraps. The broker does not weigh first. He smells. He lifts the brick to his cheek, then to his nose, and breathes in without drama. The scent is deeper today than yesterday, warmer than last week. A shade of smoke sits under the leaf, not on it. He taps the corner with a fingernail. Sound answers with a comfortable dullness, not hollow, not tight. He sets the brick on its edge and presses his thumb into the paper's face to feel the tightness of leaves beneath. He nods once, then turns to his scale because nods like to be translated. Weight is honest, bricks agree with the beam. He stacks them to buy 3 on the bench and measures the bundle against the measure he carries in his head. Stream high, he asks, still watching the pans. This morning, the foreman says, stones will show their backs by night. The broker grunts in a satisfied way that is not unfriendly. He speaks prices that walk a line between what he can pay and what the workshop should take. The foreman trims a coin's worth by mentioning the stamp's clarity and the evenness of press. The broker counters with the river's mood and the road's. They find the string where both can tie a knot and not regret it later. He sets a small purse on the bench, silver and copper in the mix, and leaves a written note for the bigger tally when the bundles travel. He requests 10 bundles for the mountains, 8 for a market downriver, and 4 to go with him today when his porter returns with an empty frame. He touches the stamp block with one knuckle, a habit perhaps, or a kind of respect for names, and steps back into sun. The boy, curious but careful, asks the foreman what the broker smelled. Time, the foreman says, smiling in a way that means he has said both a lot and a little. And whether we remember it. The pressing continues. Handle turns, thread descends, leaves net. Between presses, the foreman shows the boy how to read the screw. If it complains, just a note higher, rub tallow here. If the handle wants too much shoulder, we fed the mold more hill than corner. They lift a brick too early on purpose so the boy can see edges slump. Then they press that batch again, and the slump corners stand up straighter. Lessons prefer examples to sermons. A sudden hush in the steam tells the boy the brazier wants a friend. He feeds it a twist of pine and moves the lid a finger to the left. Steam resumes its pound. He strokes the inside of an empty mold with the palm brush to free a thread of leaf that clung there for the pleasure of opposites. He dusts with flour and sets the mat again. The mat's weave shows faintly on the brick sides, It will be hidden by paper but remains as a memory under the wrap. Midday tea happens without announcement. The small pan warms a handful of twisted leaves, water meets them, lifts their scent, cups receive 2 sips each. A woman puts a grain of salt on her tongue before sipping, her habit on humid days. The boy tries and decides the salt tastes like late summer, and that he likes late summer. They drink, place cups on the bench edge, and resume the circle. Up in the loft, air grows less shy. The boy climbs with a feather broom to invite movement between rows, a few slow sweeps, nothing that would coax dust to return. He touches one brick lightly on its face. It is almost the temperature of his own skin. Down below, the women begin wrapping the earliest bricks. The foreman stamps before paper arrives, the red marks enjoy living under the wrap's thinness the way ink enjoys living under skim, milk visible enough to be trusted, faint enough to be polite. A porter appears with a back frame to bogue poles, and a harness crosspiece batted with folded cloth. He crouches, and the foreman loads for bundles, crossing cords, adding a slip of paper under the top tie with the shop seal and the river's name. The porter rises with a little grunt, rocks once to find balance, and the load sets against his back like a question that has already been answered. He steps out without looking back. The boy tries the scale again without weights. He lifts a scoop of leaves and says a number from nowhere. The foreman smiles and does not check. "You were right," he says. The boy grins and only then checks for himself. The bean settles level. He pretends surprise because surprise is a friend of joy. By afternoon's middle, bundles form a modest wall near the door. The press's screw, well fed and well thanked, turns as if it could do so all week. Paper edges stack with their own small shadows. Rice paste thickens a whisker. The foreman tips a spoon of water and stirs until it answers smooth again. Everything answers smooth again when asked gently. Afternoon leans on the roof with a warm forearm. The millrace lowers its voice, as if listening to itself. Inside, the press keeps its steady talk while other tasks stretch their limbs. The foreman lifts a shallow iron pan from a hook and sets it on 3 low stones. A thumb of pine lights the brazier, flame answers with a blue edge that likes work. He shakes a handful of finished leaves already pressed yesterday, then loosened and broken for trial into the pan. The leaves wake with a soft rustle, then give a shy crackle. He stirs with a bamboo spatula, keeping them moving so no one leaf feels singled out. The room receives a deeper fragrance, darker than the morning's steam, and note like dried wood after rain. The boy brings a little sieve and shakes the warm leaves through it into a clay bowl, the larger bits staying above for a second turn, the powder below for blending. He cups the bowl to his face and inhales as if the scent carries a map. The foreman nods. This is what the broker listens for with his nose, he says. Not just today, but the promise of a road. He mixes a pinch of the roasted leaf with yesterday's brick shavings and tastes a tiny crumb on his tongue, bitter first, then round. Then something like warm straw. He does not judge aloud. The room prefers quiet verdicts. At the wrapping table, labels gather, sheets of slim paper, cut into slips the length of a thumb and the width of 2 lie like pale fish scales. One of the women grinds a stump of ink on an inkstone, adding water in patient circles until the surface turns black with a silk sheen. Her brush is sharp at the tip and soft along the belly. She writes stream name, shop name, day number, weight, and the press hand's small initial that looks like a reed. Her characters hold their strokes like ropes, neither tight nor slack. She stamps each slip with a tiny red dot at the end her habit and lays them where air can lift the wetness. The other woman pastes the slips to the paper wraps and flaps with a swirl of rice paste, then smooths them with the pad of her thumb. Each label keeps the same place so hands can find them by feel in storerooms. Bundles form as bricks cool, 6 to a tie, 3 lying, 3 riding above, cords crossing twice, a twist that makes a handle. The boy tests the knot and learns where to put his thumb so it releases with dignity later. He threads a narrow strand of split bamboo through the tie and adds a paper tag for distant stores market mark, road mark. The tags look like tiny sails. Clouds collect over the ridge where the stream begins. The foreman glances up. The loft knows how to behave in damp weather but appreciates being consulted. He nods to the boy. Together they climb, feather broom and palm fan in hand. The loft holds rows of bricks with the air between them like light woven into cloth. They open the gable louver a finger more and set the fan to a slow back and forth that teaches air to visit each brick equally. The boy touches the underside of a bamboo slat. No beads of moisture yet. Good. He leaves the broom leaning on a rafter, bristles down so shape will stay. They come down with steps that learn the slat spacing and forget it again. A traveler appears in the doorway wearing a hat that has argued with many suns. His back frame leans against the wall, unburdened, his sandals hold a thin lacework of dust. He is one of those who know the road between market and mountain and so well that his feet keep the map without his eyes. He asks if the press is still pressing, an unnecessary courtesy, like asking a river if it is still wet. He is given a stool and a cup. He drinks, sets the cup on his knee, and watches the screw with patient interest. Bricks travel best when they think they've already arrived, he says after a time. The foreman looks up, amused. The traveler continues, not as a lecture, more as a habit of speech shaped by miles. Pack the cord under something with a smell, cedar shavings, if you have them, or paper that slept near cooked rice. Not much, just enough to tell the bricks they are indoors. They ride quieter. The boy files this idea with the others he has liked today. Rain decides to test the roof. First, a single soft coin. Then a thin line of coins. Then a wide gray hush. The millrace brightens under it. Water leaps in narrow arcs where stones disrupt the thought. The wheel turns more eagerly. The paddles slap tiny applause. Inside, someone pulls the bamboo blinds lower along the workshop's open side, and the room narrows to its own work. Steam from the steamer becomes indistinguishable from the rain's breath, the two making a shared curtain. Humidity wants an opinion now. The foreman moves a small clay pot of charcoal under the wrapping table and wakens the coals with a pinch of pine. The heat is not for fingers, only for air. It keeps the paper's paste from thinking it lives on a shore. He touches a wrapped brick and checks for tack, no stick, just warmth. He sets a small pot of quicklime on the shelf to keep the corners damp, proud of itself. Lime likes to eat moisture politely. Tools are shifted a handspan farther from the blind's edge, the paste pot, the stamp block, the red dish. Rain loses half its argument. The boy climbs again to the loft. He holds his palm near the rafters, not to feel heat but to read movement. He learns that damp air is heavier than he thought. and that the fan must be slower now, not faster. He places two thin sticks under a shelf's edge to tip the bricks a whisper steeper, so drops will choose air rather than paper. Small physics wearing soft shoes. Below, the foreman stamps a last row before the next batch presses out. He cleans the stamped face on a folded rag, presses it once onto paper to be sure no residue remains to smudge the next name, and returns it to its slab. He oils the screw with a thumb of tallow rubbed into a scrap of cloth. The screw sighs appreciatively and turns with its comfortable sentence. The traveler eyes the bundles near the door and the rain beyond. He says he will wait until the road's skin is less new. He tells the boy about spiced caravans where bricks of tea ride like bricks of salt. The bundles between sacks of pepper and cloth. The entire load wrapped once in oil-scented paper so rain cannot interfere. He describes storage in mountain inns, bricks stacked on end on boards set away from walls, gaps between bundles wide enough for a hand to pass, narrow enough for mice to give up. Let them breathe, he says. They are like travelers. They do better when they are not pressed after the press. Rain eases to a steady thread. The boy walks to the door and holds his palm out, catches 3 drops, watches them skip down his wrist. He wipes his hand on his apron and returns to the scale. He lifts a scoop of leaves and guesses again. The foreman, for fun, pretends to weigh and nods sullenly. The boy pretends to be surprised again, then grins. They practice seriousness as a form of play. In a lull between presses, the women fold a stack of wraps with their slips already attached. The top sheet picks up a whisper of charcoal warmth from the pot below. The scent awakens in the paper just enough to please the traveler's notion about indoors. The boy slides a shaving of cedar under the next bundle's cord, proud to be early with an old idea. The rain finishes like a long sentence with a short period. Drips count themselves from the eaves. The louver remains open, the fan keeps its slow path, and the loft breathes as if it had been doing so all day, which in a way it has. The press continues its gentle groan and rest. Leaves enter, bricks leave, and the room believes in tomorrow without needing to say so. Afternoon tips toward the hour when shop lights imagine being stars. The traveler lifts his frame, adds 1 bundle with the foreman's nod for might ask too much of a wet path, and swings the harness across his shoulders. He steps into the lane, tests the ground with a toe, and then trusts it. His hat receives a last drop from the eave with grace. He goes. Inside, the boy stirs the brazier to help the steamer's last load think kindly, and the foreman writes 2 lines in the day's book. Rain-tempered loft, press even, label set. Broker returns tomorrow. He closes the book and taps it once with the brush's wooden end, a habit he could not explain even if asked. Evening begins by taking color out of edges. The millwright slows a little, as if it too prefers the softer pace. Inside, the press finishes a turn and holds. The foreman lifts the lid, peels the mat, and sets the fresh brick upright on the slatted board. Steam has thinned to a suggestion. The room smells of green turned warm, of bamboo cooled from effort, of paste deciding to be memory. Bundles gather near the door, stacked too high in a measured wall. Cords cross in their tidy habit, paper faces lie smooth, labels aligned like the steps of a careful path. The boy slides his palm across a bundle to feel for unevenness. The brush of paper under skin says everything is even enough. He tucks a cedar shaving under the top cord of each stack, remembering the traveler's advice. The shavings sit like modest secrets. The broker returns, dry now and at ease with the road. He brings a low table from the threshold and sets it inside the line of shadow. On the table, a small scale, a leather purse, a folded paper book of accounts with a brush tucked through its tie. He greets with a tilt of the chin. The foreman answers with a nod and a gesture toward the bundles. They do not rush. Accounts prefer slowness to accuracy's sake. He chooses two bundles at random, unties each with a twist that dignifies the knot, and taps the face of the top brick with a fingernail. The sound answers, dim, steady. He weighs a brick from each pan. Pen then writes a tiny mark in his book. The boy watches how the brush makes numbers with fewer strokes than letters. The broker smells a brick as before, closes his eyes briefly, then opens them with a satisfied look. River has remembered itself, he says. The foreman agrees with a small sound that does not disturb any ghosts. Coins come out of the purse, silver mostly, some copper, enough to speak for road and risk and fairness. The broker lays them in lines of 5, then 4, then 1 each line, a little river. The foreman gathers them into cloth with a sewn-in pocket so they will not argue with each other on the walk home. A slip of paper arrives from the broker's brush. Day, number of bundles, total weight, price, mark of his house. The foreman sets his own mark on another slip and ties it under the top cord of the stack that will travel with the broker tonight. Paper shakes hands with paper. The boy lifts the bundle and finds a shoulder for it. The porter hooks the load with calm hands. Accounts settle like stones at the bottom of a stream. A tasting follows, not ceremony, just obedience to habit. The foreman carries the small pan to the brazier and scatters a pinch of roasted leaf into hot water. He adds a grain of salt, remembering the woman's way from earlier. Into another cup he pours a little rice water from a jar pail. Starchy drink the boy sometimes takes when tired. They sip each in order, straight tea first, then tea with the faintest salt, then a mouthful of rice water to find the tea's echo. The broker smiles after the salted sip. Road likes that, he says. The boy nods, because the road is always thirsty. The press wants closing. The foreman wipes the screw's exposed thread with a cloth that carries a hint of tallow. He turns the handle until the lid sits level with the platform, neither pressed nor free, so wood will wake tomorrow without finding it has learned to work. He dusts the platform with the palm brush, then rubs the beam where shoulders often lean. A small cloth, slightly oily, gets tied around the screw's housing to keep night air from teaching it rust. He sets the molds in a row on their shelf, mats rolled and tied with their cords lying like sleeping snakes above them. The flour gourd gets its cork. The paste pot receives a paper lid with a finger's width of gap so it can breathe, and still remember to be paste in the morning. In the loft, the boy gives the fan 3 last quiet swings and closes the louver to the line they use when stars can be seen through its teeth. He touches the face of a brick. It is nearly warm now. He likes that word merely because it means the work is done even if the day goes on. He descends, each rung a familiar thought. He brushes a few leaf crumbs into a pan and takes it to the threshold for the small birds who come when the room sleeps. The broker cinches his bundle, bows a short bowl, and leaves in a way that does not teach the door to swing. The porter follows, loaded and confident, steps careful where the lane holds the day's last dampness. The boy listens to their footfalls go from wood to earth to the suggestion of distance. He likes that sequence too. The foreman opens the day's book. He writes 3 lines, rain eased, loft steady, 18 bundles ready, 10 departed. He adds a dot to mark the boy's steady weight guessing, and sets the brush on the book's tie to dry. He counts the coins into their pockets, copper to the small sleeve, silver to the deeper one, pats them into stillness, then tucks the cloth into a niche above the bench where thieves would have to grow patience to find it. Sweeping sounds begin. The women roll the bamboo blinds up to hands so night can look in without coming in. The boy sweeps leaf dust and flour to the door in long strokes that admire the floor. He lifts mats and shakes them once, not twice. Once is enough and does not teach fray. The foreman empties the brazier into an ash pot, scatters the ash thin along a patch of ground that will take it into something useful tomorrow. Ash likes to be helpful in more than one place. In the after-hum of work, the millrace grows clear again. Water still moves, but it has given back a little energy to the hill. Frogs wonder if they should speak. They decide on a later hour. A moth visits the lamp and then behaves itself. The boy runs a finger along the stamp's carved face, then wipes the finger on his apron. Cinnabar prefers respect. He puts the stamp to bed on its slab face up, so its name does not lean on the wood. They set the finished bundles in a taller stack against the wall whose feet stay dry in heavy rains. The foreman slides a board beneath to keep air under. The boy adjusts labels so all read the same way. He slips a thin slot between 2 stacks where paper looked like it wished for company. The slot becomes company. He tugs once at a cord and watches the whole wall not move. He smiles to himself and does not tell anyone. There is a last small tasting, for comfort more than judgment. Water warmed in a clay pot, a few grains of roasted rice, a pinch of today's finds. They drink standing, each with a different rhythm. The women sip quickly, clean the cups with a half turn of the wrist, and set them upside down on the bench edge. The boy sips slowly and holds the empty cup until the clay gives back its little stored heat. The foreman takes 2 sips, then one from the rice water jar, then breathes as if the breath itself were tea. Closing is not a single moment, it is a thread. The foreman ties the press handle to its post with a half knot that can be persuaded with one hand in the morning. He lays the long turning bar along the beam, chalking one end with a tiny mark to show which side prefers the first pull. He pinches the lamp wick shorter so it will not smoke later, and leaves the lamp sleeve half down to tell it the hour. The boy fetches his shoulder strap and tries the weight of one last bundle, not to carry, just to know. He sets it back with a nod, then smooths the top paper as if smoothing hair. He places the cedar shavings where nose and hand will find them first at dawn, so the bricks will remember what the traveler said about indoors. He blows out a small breath he did not know he held. They stand in the doorway a moment. The millrace moves like a long sentence written in a careful hand. Fireflies begin to hang their tiny lanterns over the wet edge of the path. The foreman closes the door not quite shut, so the room can keep listening to water while it sleeps. The boy lifts the latch with his finger and lets it fall, testing its small voice. Good. It will say the right word in the morning. Inside, the press rests like a tree that has decided to dream. Paper sleeps under its own weight. Paste remembers. Stamps do not. All of this is correct. Night finishes the day the way a brush lifts from a stroke quietly. With a little flourish you feel more than see. The millwright wears a thinner shine, and the wheel turns by habit now, not by need. Inside, the workshop holds its own warmth like bread under a cloth. The lamp wick, cut short earlier, keeps a steady pearl of light. It falls across the press and the stacked bundles and turns every cord into a soft line. The foreman and the boy return from the lane with hands washed in the pump's cold water. They dry on the same cloth that dries cups, and then stand between press and door to let eyes choose night. The air smells of bamboo and faint ash of tea that has decided to stay leaf even after all the pressing. The foreman sets a small basket on the bench and empties it. Inside, a handful of tomorrow's withered leaves waits for choosing. Selection, tonight, is a touch language. He pinches a leaf and rolls it between fingers. The leaf should bend like a respectful bow, not crack, not sulk. He sorts 3 small piles, soft as rain, firm as a promise, stubborn as a mule. He nods toward the firm pile. Morning wants these, he says. They learn shape kindly. The boy cups a palmful, listens to the dry whisper they make, and tips them back. He will remember the sound. From a shelf, the foreman brings down a cloth that once was a shirt and spreads it on the bench. He pours a scoop of fines powder and tiny leaf crumbs onto it, draws the corners together, and ties a soft knot to make a sachet. He crushes the bundle once, gently. For scent, he says, and lays it near the stacked bundle so the night will learn to smell like indoors. The boy adds 2 cedar shavings to the sachets, not for the traveler's sake. The knot receives them and says nothing. They walk the room, not to check, more to greet. The press rests with its turning bar chalked for morning. The molds lie in order, mats rolled, and labeled with a thin reed slip stuck under the strings. The stamp blocks sleep face up on their slab. The paste pot sighs under its paper lid. The gum breathes through the tiny gap. The boy touches the beam where shoulders lean most often and feels the day's memory. He smiles into the wood without anyone seeing. An early porter will come before dawn. The foreman measures a path across the floor with his eyes straight, walk from bundles to door, no foot catching on stray tools, no cords thinking they are snakes. He pulls the bundles intended for the mountain road half a pace forward, their labels all reading toward the door, their cords given one last press with the palm. He slips a slat of bamboo between wall and stack, only as thick as a corn, so air can thread there and not make mischief. The ledger will want its last lines. He opens the paper book and writes slow numbers that do not spill. Total bricks, bundles, wraps used, paste mixed, flour scooped, cedar shavings remaining. He adds a small note about the traveler's advice, cord under cedar, room smell travels with them, and sets the brush down across the book's die to dry and to remember where it lives. The lamp's pearl lowers without smoke. They drink a last small cup of water that warmed its mind on a few roasted crumbs, nothing more, and listen to themselves swallow. The boy places the empty cup upside down on the bench to show it has finished being a cup tonight. The foreman leaves his cup upright to say the room may drink from it if it wishes. They step outside for a slow lap along the millrace. Stones keep their dark shoulders just above the water, slick but not dangerous. In the shallows, minnows flicker in a way that feels like thinking. The boy bends to gather a thin branch fallen from the willow. He snaps it shorter and uses it as a pointer to name things softly to himself. Plank, post, paddle, pebble. The foreman does not interrupt naming. Names and sleep have a good friendship. At the far end of the sluice, a gate wears a rope handle. He lifts it one notch to give the wheel less work through midnight. The wheel thanks him by paying less attention to itself. The night sky pushes a few stars through a cloud's edge. The stars consider the water and give it a little company. A moth registers their passing and forgets it immediately. They return to the door, and the foreman sets the latch so it rests, but does not grip a gesture that lets the porter enter with a soft knock rather than rattle a sleeping house. The boy folds the cloth that lives by the door, squares its corners, and lays it where hands will find it in the first unlit minute of morning. He places the cedar sachet atop the bundle stack so the smell can wander the wall at its own pace. Sleep happens to rooms too. The lamp wick lowers again. A cricket under the sill writes a brief note, then loses interest. The boy's yawn arrives, chastened and slow. He gathers his shoulder strap and touches the stamp's carved face with a clean finger, just a hello for tomorrow, and steps into the lane. The foreman stays a breath longer to listen to the wheel's last word, then covers the lamp with its sleeve and leaves as well, door leaning closed but not latched, the sound of water like a blanket. The porter's knock comes while the stars still own the sky. It is the polite knock of someone who carries weight for a living. The foreman answers with the door's first word, wood on wood, well acquainted. They lift two bundles to the frame, slip the cord through the crosspiece, and tuck a reed under the tie so the knot will not bite the paper. The porter bends, the load climbs his back, and the frame rests along his spine as if it were a friend from childhood. He receives a cedar shaving under the strap and grins at the indulgence. He pads away, steps measuring the solid parts of the path without stepping on the path's opinions. When the porter has taken the first load's distance, they load the second. The boy walks it to the threshold and rests it on his thigh the way he has seen the foreman do a small rehearsal of future strength. He sets it down again. The rehearsal is enough. The foreman adds a final slip under the cord, stamped with the shop mark, more for comfort than identification. Comfort likes to be repeated. Dawn is still a rumor when they close the door for real. The latch drops with its small approval. The millwright prepares its morning sentence. The screw will be woken, the mats unrolled, the flour shaken like quiet snow, the steamer undressed with a rake. The sachet scent hangs in the workshop like a remembered story. The boy breathes it in and keeps a little behind his teeth, as if scent could be saved that way. Maybe it can. They turn to the lane. The sky beneath the ridge is a thin wash of gray tea. Somewhere far off a rooster tries his voice and then owns it. The foreman rests his palm on the door, says nothing, and moves his hand away as if taking a promise with him for later. Work here is done for the night, and the bricks are ready for road and water. And water leads to coast, and coast to the wide dark where stars write their slow maps. As the millwright learns the first color of day and the press imagines its next turn, let us step beyond the last field and into warm salt air. We will ride a double canoe where lashings creak like sleeping rope, and a navigator reads a sky without paper or ink. Night here is not empty, it is printed with slow instructions. The double canoe rocks in warm black water that feels like the inside of a long breath. Two hulls, twin wooden moons, hold the sea apart just enough so a small platform can live between. Lashings of coconut fiber cross and recross in neat diagonals, Each knot knows its promise and keeps it in the quiet language of cord. Above, a crab-claw sail sleeps in a narrow fold, tied modestly to the yard so wind can think while people listen. There is no hurry, distance will still be there at dawn. The navigator sits near the fore-platform, knees easy, back straight without stiffness. Beside him, a low rail carries a star compass painted in small, pale marks, a memory aid for the crew. Though the true compass lives in his head, he rests his fingers on the rail, shifting them from notch to notch as certain stars rise. He does not count time in minutes, but in risings, crossings, and sinkings. Tonight, a bright white star stands low to the north, steady but not scolding. Near the east, a red star tests the horizon, then owns it. Far overhead, a scattering like salt marks the roof of the sky. When those grains lean, he knows the canoe has drifted a little past his polite line. The platform smells of sun-salted wood and dried pandanus mats. A calabash of fresh water sits in a woven cradle. It tips forward with the canoe's slow nod and then sits square again. Beside it, a little bundle of cooked taro and breadfruit sleeps under leaves. A shell pendant hangs at the navigator's neck, worn by skin and air. The pendant knows his pulse. He knows the pulse of the swells. He lets his palm settle against the deck and listens with his hand. Swell reads like script. One long line arrives from the east, the memory of trades that boo all day. Another, lower and slower, comes from a far south, the afterword of a storm they never saw. A third, thinner, feels like a question. He maps these lines into a body chart. One swell against the heel, another against the small of the back, the doubtful one across the shoulder when he leans. To hold the correct path, he keeps one swell pressing the canoe's starboard hull just so, and another crossing under the lashings like a soft drum. If the drum's beat slides to the wrong rib, he nudges the steering paddle a palm's breadth. The canoe obeys without complaint. A crewman, quiet with practice, checks lashings along the crossbeams. He walks in a knee bend that matches the sea, palm pressing each knot as if taking its temperature. Another tends the sheet on the sleeping sail, no pull now, only a readiness. A third bails from the leeward hull with a carved wooden scoop, water leaving the boat like small thoughts leaving a crowded mind. Their hair smells of salt and a little coconut oil, their hands smell of rope and wood. Voices stay small. When speech is needed, it is shaped to carry only as far as the next pair of ears. This may feel unusual today, but for many ocean peoples, navigation was a craft of memory and senses. Stars, swells, the color of water near shoals, the run of clouds above unseen islands all offered names and numbers before metal compasses and paper charts. What others write with ink, the navigator keeps in muscle and bone. He raises his eyes. On the horizon, a low cloud glows a shade lighter than the night around it. He notes its exact seat against the star compass. Clouds that hold a steadied pale often sit above atolls whose lagoons lend their reflected light to the bottom of the sky. He does not chase it. He lets it sit there as a witness. Far to the west, another cloud stands with a flat underside. Highland often wears that style. He files that shape with the others a ledge for later. He tests the wind with his cheek. It tastes like warm ironwood and distant rain. He wets a finger with his tongue and holds it above his head. The side that cools tells him that the breath has backed a finger's worth since twilight. He rests a hand on the steering paddle and lets its long blade find a new angle. no more than the width of a thumb. The canoe's talk with the water adjusts. The drumbeat under the lashings returns to its familiar rhythm. The star house he wants tonight is a low doorway at the eastern edge, the place where a certain bright star rises when the canoe's path is true. It has not come yet. Before it does, a smaller star must visit the northern shoulder of the sky. When it passes overhead to the south, he will know they have not wandered too far north or south. This is latitude without numbers, measured in the arc from ear to ear. He lifts one hand and measures another star's height with fist and thumb. The sky answers his hand, the canoe answers the sky. He opens the leaf bundle and breaks a piece of breadfruit. He passes it along. Fingers brush, soft as cloth. He sips from the calabash and wipes a drop from his chin with the back of his hand. No one says cheers aloud. The ocean prefers simpler words. Here, now enough? On the aft platform, a small gourd rattle hangs from a line. When the lashings strain too suddenly or the canoe's nose tries to dig, the rattle taps wood on its own. It serves as a mild alarm, not for danger, only for drift in mood. Tonight it remains a quiet ornament. A line of fishing hooks, bone and shell, whispers against a beam with a sound like teeth in a small laugh. They are not fishing now. Night is for the road. He looks again to the horizon. Phosphorescent tiny sea light stirs along the bow as if someone scattered a handful of ground stars across the water. When the canoe keeps course, the pattern stays centered. When the steering paddle forgets its small promise, the scatter leans to one side. He watches for leaning when clouds hide the sky. The sea offers backup. A low chant begins near the mid-beam, only a few notes on an old line, no words to snag the mind. It sets a cadence for the bailing, the checking, the small tasks that keep a floating house tidy. The navigator does not lead it. He lets it wrap the crew in something as soft as pandanus. He hums once and then listens. Silence is also a kind of steering. If the day had been windy, the sail might hold some of that energy now. Instead it rests furled, a pale triangle traced against a darker piece of night. The canoe makes its way by the sea's push and by a slow, measured paddle when the helmsman asks. Paddles dip and rise without splash, the boat breathes. He speaks 3 words over his shoulder, naming the next star that will lift the east. The helmsman answers with a nod the navigator does not need to see. A boy on his first long passage, wrapped to the chin in a mat, rolls onto one elbow and peeks under hair to catch the star's first tooth. He is not told not to look. Looking is part of becoming. He settles again and lets strings of light find him behind his eyelids. The navigator's shell pendant cools as a small cloud hosts the moon for a while. Without the moon's path, the stars grow more precise. With the moon's, the sea and skin grow friendlier. He imagines the pattern of dawn birds that will come there, and how their choices will confirm or refuse the long lines of sky. He adjusts the paddle the width of a little finger. The canoe answers yes. Overhead, the salt scatter leans at last. The red star in the east lifts clean. He moves his hand along the rail, 1 notch to the left, then 2. The course is good. He releases a breath he had not borrowed. The crew hears nothing special. They have learned to trust the unannounced. Behind the canoe, wake draws twin furrows, taut and parallel, catching light like thread pulled through dark cloth. Ahead, The horizon promises nothing, and, by that nothing, gives everything. Wind arrives like a polite guest, felt first on cheek, then heard, then seen in the smallest curl along the water. The navigator tilts his face, accepts the greeting, and nods toward the helmsman. No call, no clatter. Hands move to untie the sail's sleeping fold. The crab claw opens with the grace of a palm leaf waking, ribs of the yard showing for a heartbeat before cloth finds its shape. The sheet pays up the length of a forearm. The sail drinks only what it can hold without spilling. The canoe leans one finger into the wind, and then settles, as if it were always meant to be here. The new breath asks for a trim. A crewman crouches the windward beam, hand on the sheet, eyes on the sail's leading edge. He listens for the faintest rattle that means the cloth is bored. He inches the line until the rattle grows shy and disappears. The hulls hum, not with speed, but with agreement. Spray does not volunteer. The canoe's talk with the swell changes key and keeps the same song. The navigator checks the star that rose red earlier. It has climbed a hand and a half, now more amber than red, content to be an ordinary light among others. He slides his fingers another notch along the star compass rail, a small move for a long consequence. A short bird call carries from somewhere behind, not a bird, just the creak of a lash settling into its night posture. He smiles at the trick the sea enjoys disguises. Clouds at the eastern edge shift from black to the kind of gray a river's stone keeps when wet. He reads their undersides. A cool gray can mean open water. A warm gray can betray the blur of sand on a shoal far away. A pale belly sometimes hints at lagoon light rising into cloud. Tonight the undercolor is ordinary, not quite warm, not especially cool. He files it under watching rather than deciding. Birds begin their circuits long before people would call it morning. A pair of seabirds sweeps low, long wings barely tapping wind, crossing from starboard to port in a lazy arc. Islanders say birds prefer to fly a certain pattern when they are commuting outward in evening, inward before dawn. He notes the direction with a look to the rail marks. If their arc repeats and tightens, it will be a soft sign of land within a day's hunger. For now it is a ribbon in the dark, nothing to tie yet. Midnight gathers itself without the moon's help, then the moon rolls free of a cloud and surveys the crew like a kind aunt. Light does not flatten the stars, it smooths them. The navigator lets the steering paddle rest against the rail for a breath while he checks lashings. He moves along the cross beams with a knee-bent walk the canoe recognizes. Each knot is a small promise he asked earlier, and now asks again. He presses his thumb against fiber, feels for damp, listens for the tone a stretched cord makes, a thread of sound almost too thin to hear. Where the note is sharp, he rubs a little coconut oil into the lashing and works the knot with 2 fingers until the note softens. Where a turn has shifted, he rocks it back home with the heel of his hand. At the aft platform, a basket of small things keeps the canoe civilized: spare cord, a bone needle, a shell scraper, a candle nut already strung for burning if some other light sulks, and a few pebbles polished by the sea for reasons no one needs to name. He adds a short length of fresh cord to the basket and removes a frayed one. The old cord will dry by sunrise and find a second life as a tie for something that minds less. Food makes a quiet circle. A leaf bundle opens, and roasted taro passes from palm to palm. A child wakes, takes a bite the size of a shell, and closes his eyes again with a soft sound that belongs to mouths and dreams. The navigator drinks a small mouthful of water and wets the sail's windward edge with 2 fingers so the cloth will remember to be supple. He brushes a palm across the deck. Salt dust answers like fine sand, a map of the day's breath under heel and hand. He returns to the steering paddle, lays it in the crook where shoulder likes to live, and lets the blade read the water's sentence. The paddle is long, its grip smooth from many seasons. He does not lever it so much as lean near it, letting weight ask rather than force. The canoe responds with a slight change in the hum across the lashings. The gourd rattle remains indifferent. This is good. A low band of cloud rises in the south. He notes its height with fist and thumb, and then glances to the star that serves as a width measure between 2 brighter neighbors. The gap is the same. Latitude holds. He allows himself a thought of a certain atoll green ring bright lagoon, a pass whose current barks harder on an outgoing tide. Not tonight. Not yet. The thought is a sweet kept in the mouth without biting. The crewman on the sheet shifts his seat the length of a palm. His movement changes the sail's curve by almost nothing and, by almost nothing, improves the canoe's talk with the wind. He looks to the navigator and gets a small nod he can feel more than see. He settles. A line of looks whispers again, and then is still. When clouds pull across the eastern stars, the sea keeps the test. The navigator watches the phosphorescent scatter along the bow. He lets his eye turn. Soft hard eyes miss pattern. Soft eyes see the writing of turbulence. When the pattern centers, the course holds. When it slants, he strokes the paddle almost lazily to nudge the nose a little. The luminous dust recenters. He imagines the scatter as a string drawn through water by a steady hand. He holds that string on the canoe's seam. The moon gives a lesson it teaches every voyage. It rises where it will, but its path sketches a slow arc that can serve as a yard. Tonight its arc leans toward the south a little. If he keeps the moon at the same shoulder for a watch, and the swell keeps its drum along the same rib, the canoe will hold the line even when clouds discourage stars. He names, not aloud, the shoulder that will host the moon left now, then right when the watch turns. He tells the helmsman in a few words, moon at the ear, and touches his own ear. The helmsman nods and smiles into the dark as if someone told a good joke. Half a watch later, the wind sulks. The sail needs different attention now. Less sheet, a slightly fuller belly to learn what breath remains. The crewman slacks a thumb's worth, holds, then takes it back half. The cloth murmurs approval. The canoe's speed is not a number anyone says. It lives in the shape of the wake and the note of water under the bow. Tonight it is enough to make the horizon come at a walking pace. A bird returns, perhaps the same, perhaps a cousin. It crosses forward, then returns along nearly the same path, then climbs and slides inland if inland exists at a low angle, as if a line tied its breastbone to a place off the port bow. The navigator watches without pursuit. He places a thought pin where the bird fell from sky to unseen ground. If to more agree, he will move the canoe's conversation with the wind just a finger toward that memory. The helmsman hums a fragment of a reef song one singers learn when they clean fish under a tree near home. The notes are soft enough to not wake the boy, strong enough to remind bones where they grew. The navigator joins for 2 breaths, and then stops so he can hear water again. The canoe takes the song into its timbers and releases it not as sound, but as steadiness. A small squall shows its thin shoulders to windward. In the dark it looks like a place the night forgot to fill. The navigator reads the edges, no sharp cap, base not tasting the sea too harshly. He keeps the sail as it is, and lets the squall walk its brief path in the sky, patting the water once or twice as a relative would pat a child's head in passing. A few drops visit faces and hands. Salt accepts them without argument. The moon approaches the place where it will share the sky with first gray. The navigator rehearses dawn. He imagines the band where night thins, and how the low paling will erase the smaller stars first, then the higher ones, leaving the bright witnesses. He names the star he wants to see just before day. Its rising aligns with the notch in the boom, and the seam on the platform where two planks meet. He slides his fingers along the rail to the next notch. The crew changes posture in tiny ways, one shoulder, one knee, the way a foot rests under a beam, settling into the last stretch before light. He wets his finger again and tastes the wind. It carries a dry sweetness that the open ocean owns when no land interrupts it. He decides not to change a thing. Holding the line is sometimes more work than finding it. He lets the paddle be a weight rather than a lever, the canoe a partner rather than a burden. The wake keeps its twin stitches straight. The night has been a book they could read without touching. Soon the page will turn itself. First gray is not a line but a slow permission. It begins as a thinning at the rim where sea pretends to touch sky, then gathers into a band the color of cooled tin. The stars comply one by one, stepping back without offense. A few bright ones linger as courteous elders. The crew shifts a little the way knees unlock, the way a shoulder finds a new rest. The sail keeps its small belly. The canoe tastes the new light and seems to approve. The navigator watches for small colors inside the gray. A faint wash of coral breeds along one cloud, pink like an open shell. Farther north, a thin green lives at the edge of another cloud, nothing dramatic, just a sea glass hint. He files both. At dawn, warm tints above a fixed place sometimes whisper of land that warms the underside of cloud. Cool tints can mean long water. This morning reads mostly open, with a suggestion to the north that is not yet a sentence. Birds begin to draw their paths like threads laid over cloth. Two terns appear first, stitching low and from starboard, and then angling toward port, as if a gentle hand guided them. A frigate bird rides higher, no hurry in its long wings, turning once in a wide circle, as if reading the same book as the canoe. Islanders often say birds tell the last page before land out late and early. He notes the directions portward, then higher, then inward, and does not change course yet. One circuit is a rumor. 3 circuits make a plan. He asks for the sail to hold the wind a breath tighter. The sheetman gives a thumb, the cloth smooths its leading edge, and the canoe's hum settles into a new vowel. The steering paddle remains a leaning more than a lever. Under the lashings, the drumbeat of swell keeps to the familiar rib. The navigator counts the low swells against his heel and confirms the long memory of the trades remains underneath. Breakfast water warms without fire's drama. A candle nut kukui strung on a thin skewer becomes a modest light, and heat both. The nut burns with a steady, tame flame. A small pot sits above it on 3 shells holding water, and a pinch of roasted breadfruit crumb. The liquid will not boil. It will remember warmth. The child stirs with the end of a sliver of wood and blows a breath that the flame ignores. When the navigator is offered the cup, he takes one small sip and returns it. Warmth travels well in mouths. Clouds to the south begin to show higher bellies that flatten near their bases, a shape sometimes worn by highland. The flattening is not strong, he notes it, and keeps it in the drawer where later is filed. He prefers to confirm with water. He closes his eyes and lets his palm read the deck again. The swell set from the east holds its line. A possible cross ripple tickles the lashings, a hair different than in night. He asks the helmsman to hold steady while he does a swell test. The test is patience. He lets the canoe ride a long roller without asking the paddle to speak, then listens for a returning ripple, water thrown back from something solid far off. A faint, shallow flutter touches the platform and goes. He waits for it again. When it returns after the same count, he knows it is not the boat imagining things. Reflected swell means a wall somewhere, reef cliff, or the long side of a big atoll. The flutter comes from port forward. He moves one finger width along the rail, only one. Course remains good. The flutter joins the day's chorus as a quiet harmony rather than a warning. The boy wakes fully and sits wrapped in his mat like a conch in its lip. He watches birds now, counting flights without knowing he is counting. The navigator nods to him and points with his mouth, a small tilt to a turn, returning low with apparent intention. The boy follows the line with his nose, then with his eyes. He smiles at having learned a new way to point. A thin brush of pink writes itself higher. The sea near the bar writes back in quicksilver marks where small fish gather under the surface at first light. The crewman at the sheet shifts weight along the beam, smooth as a cat changing windowsills. The sail keeps interest without becoming proud. A gourd rattle taps only once as a lashing settles to a daytime posture. No correction needed. Sometimes boats adjust to morning the way bodies do. Gentle commentary belongs here. In many canoe traditions, noon can be taken by shadow. Not a number on paper, but a feeling of height when the sun makes the shortest, most centered shade. Some navigators keep a mast mark or a notch on a rail that shows where that noon shadow tip should fall for the latitude they intend. Others test with fingertip and memory the distance between sun and horizon measured in fists stacked from the rim, the number of fists at noon remembered from other days on that line of sea. There are many good ways to know the same truth. He prepares for noon without watching the sun as a clock. He ties a thin cord to a short stick and sets the stick upright in a little lump of wax near the center line of the platform. When the sun climbs higher, the stick's shade will shorten toward the cord's knot. He will mark with a dab of charcoal where the tip rests at the shortest, then compare it with a mark from another voyage on this path, kept faint on the beam. It is a maker's check, not a master's rule. The child offers him a piece of dried fish the size of a finger. He eats it into bites, tasting smoke and sea and the hands of someone who sat by a cook fire long before this night. He drinks a small mouthful of water and rubs the back of his neck where salt sits like fine sand. A crewman sings to lines of a breadfruit planting chant, then stops exactly where the lines ask him to stop. The canoe hums the rest. Bird circuits increase. 3 turns in a row cross in from the same bearing, then swing to port and vanish. The frigate bird returns and wanders higher. then floats in place for a heartbeat as if testing air that has already met land. The navigator lets the canoe hold its line and counts one more circuit. The next pair arrives along the same path and then turns inward with the same curve. 2 is strong. 3 is a promise. He moves his hand along the rail one more small notch, then returns it. Steadiness remains the order. Land may be there tomorrow's middle rather than today's end. The swell test repeats itself kindly, faint return after a count that fits a distance measured in hours. He says a few words to the helmsman that amount to "as you are." The helmsman keeps the paddle as a thought rather than a command. The child, encouraged, counts the breaths between long rollers in a whisper and grins when the number repeats. The candle nut finishes its service. The wick dies with dignity. The small pot's warmth holds enough to offer 2 last sips. The boy takes one. A crewman with the sheet takes the other. Both cups return empty and happy. The navigator gathers the nut's cooled bead of ash in a leaf. Ash keeps sails polite when rubbed thinly at the edges, then tucks the leaf under the rail for later. Sun rises to a height the hand can measure. Fists stacked from horizon up to the sun. 1, 2, 3, and a thumb. He does not say the number aloud. He matches the feel to another morning on another path and finds a comfortable echo. Noon will fall a little high today, as expected for this latitude and season. He smooths the waxed base of the little stick and watches the shadow shorten finger by finger. Before the shortest moment, he checks the deck seam that serves as a silent ruler. The shadow tip pauses at a place he recognizes just shy of a tiny dent in the wood made by a dropped shell seasons ago. He touches the dent and smiles because objects remember for us. He puts a thumb smudge of charcoal where the shadow stops and lets the sun begin to lengthen the shade again. Noon has offered its small bow and left the stage. He speaks softly to the crew, all as it should be, not a boast, a porch-light phrase. The helmsman hums in reply, and the sheetman adjusts the line by the thickness of a reed to honor the sun's new angle. Birds continue still returning from the same direction, still angling inland. The cloud with the pale underside to the north keeps that pale. The swell returns after the same count. All these small separate agreements add up to a sentence the canoe can read without eyes. The boy brings out the paddle he is allowed to use when seas are forgiving. He dips it once beside the hull deep, slow, respectful, then lays it down again. He will carry the sea's weight in his arms soon enough. For now he learns that holding a line is a kind of kindness. By mid-morning the gray has become daylight without announcing its promotion. The navigator checks the star compass rail. Even though stars have left, the marks mean more than one sky. He feels the grooves and knows which house they slept under last night and where they will sleep next. He lays his palm on the platform and listens, then lifts it and looks ahead. The horizon is honest, the canoe hums. Noon has been measured by fingertip and shadow. Birds draw their letters. The road of water stays open. Afternoon lays a warm hand on the sail. Shadows thin. The water turns from slate to a blue that remembers green. Wine keeps a small promise, neither stingy nor bold. The canoe's 2 hulls part the sea with soft twin whispers. The lashings sing a low line you feel more than hear. A thread at the sail's leech has grown proud. Nothing urgent, just a stitch asking to be noticed. The navigator nods to the crewman nearest the yard. He loosens a palm of sheet so the cloth relaxes, then ties himself with a short safety loop to the beam. Out comes a bone needle smooth as a shell's lip, and a length of sennit cord rubbed with a touch of coconut oil. The needle slides in and out along the edge. Each bite is small. Each pull is steady. He sets the new stitch to follow the old rhythm, not to argue with it. When the mending meets the next seam, he ties a flat knot the wind cannot bully and presses it with his thumb. The cloth answers with a clean curve. The sheet takes its breath again, and the sail resumes its quiet work. Color teaches as surely as stars. The navigator crouches near the bow and watches the water's face. Far ahead, a faint band looks less blue, more pale, like jade milked with light. Water over a shoal often carries that color sand speaking upward through depth. He lowers his gaze to the sea near at hand. The hue here stays deep and honest. He straightens and looks forward again. The pale band is not moving with the swells as quickly as the surrounding blue. That too can be a hint. He lifts a hand to the helmsman and traces a small arc in the air, just to finger widths of new course. The paddle obeys with the grace of a bow. The canoe slides a little more to starboard. The milky band widens and then veers away like a polite passerby. A commentary belongs here, said without hurry. Before lead lines and painted charts, many navigators read water by tint, by the way light returned from the surface, and by the shape of waves over hidden ground. Even small changes, a softer chop, a pale stroke, a line of brown where silt lifts could whisper the presence of sand tongues or reef shoulders. Sight and patience did the measuring. Clouds gather into a traveling shade. The sun steps behind them and lets the world cool a little. Air smells closer like damp pandanus and distant rain. The sail's belly softens. The sheepman lets a thumb of line live freer. A thin dark line rides the far water, straight as a thought. A squall has decided to visit. There is no alarm, only rearrangement. Mats lift from the platform and hang along the windward rail to make a brief wall. Gourds settle under the outer beam. The crew ties back the sail to a smaller shape that cannot complain. The navigator checks lashings along the cross beams once more with the back of his hand. Knots are still friendly. The squall arrives not with noise, but with presence. First, a peppering of cold drops that sow themselves across skin. Then a short, polite rush. Water leaps from the sail's lower edge in a clear sheet. The crew set gourds under the drip and smile at this small fortune. Salt leaves faces and hair. The canoe wears fresh water for a moment, then lets it go. The child laughs once, and then covers his grin with the back of his hand, as he has been taught to keep joy from becoming boast. Rain slides away as suddenly as it came. Sun returns with a glance like approval. Everything shines briefly, then returns to work. Mats go to the platform, laid open to dry. They exhale the damp from their weave. The navigator turns one, then another, so both faces learn the sun. He shakes water from the steering paddle's grip and rubs the wood with a cloth that carries a breath of oil. Salt is a memory again, not a coat. Wine trails off after the squall as if content with the errand. The sail rests in a narrow fold, tied with two simple turns. The canoe must hold its line by swell alone for a time. This is not a loss, it is a practice. The navigator settles by the steering paddle. He closes his eyes, then opens them. He reads the low, long roller that has kept them honest all day, the one that presses the starboard hull with a patient hand. He matches the canoe to that hand, not with force, but with weight. A slight lean here, a finger more blade there. Under the lashings, the quiet drum marks a beat he can keep even if clouds borrow the sky all afternoon. The sea writes more lines for those who look. A subtle texture cat's pose of darker ripples shows a narrow vein of breeze slanting across the larger swell. He allows the nose to meet that vein at a kind angle, stealing a little push without giving up the main path. A patch of smooth water lies beyond like cloth pulled tight. Smooth often means wind is shy there. He turns a breath early and leaves the smoothness to others. Little choices keep the big idea safe. A crewman checks the bailer, though the hulls are near dry. Ritual loves small tasks. Another rubs a few lashings with fresh oil where the rain kissed them. Wet rope can stiffen if it is ignored. The boy fans the mats and sings under his breath a song that lists the names of winds he has learned, the gentle one that comes not every day, the playful one that argues with sails, the dignified one that does not hurry for anyone. He reaches the end of the list and starts again, slower this time, like a lullaby for strings and beams. The navigator tows a small knot at the platform's edge and readies it cleaner. His shell pendant lies cool against his chest from the rain. He raises his face. A wide ceiling of cloud has taken the sky for itself, no sunblade, no hard shadows, no bright seam where sea meets light. It is an honest gray that seeks no drama. He smiles. This is when memory works without lanterns. He lifts his left hand and sets the moon's earlier lesson into his shoulder out of habit even though the moon has gone. He keeps the long swell under the right ribs and counts the smaller beat as if tapping the rim of a drum. He checks watercolor once more. The earlier pale band has moved behind, thin as a thought recalled after its moment. Ahead the blue holds steady. A few brown flecks drift by tiny leaves and seeds, washed out by a river somewhere. They do not mark distance, but they say land exists in a direction that makes sense with birds and swell. He approves of the world's agreement. When the mats are dry, they stack light and flat. A quick brush clears the platform of grit. The gourds are half a finger heavier from rain and are wrapped in cloth to keep the sun from scalding them. The crewman who patched the sail touches his seam once more and nods. The thread lies quiet, its pride satisfied. Cloud light thickens toward late afternoon. The canoe hums without sail, guided by the steadiness of water's long lines and the weight of hands that know their work. The child sleeps with a paddle under his arm like a promised pie. The helmsman hums the lowest part of a planting chant so softly that even the deck must lean close to hear. The navigator eats a strip of dried fish and a thumb of breadfruit, drinks 2 sips of collected rain, and wipes a drop from his lip with a finger. He imagines the first star that will pierce this ceiling when it decides to loosen. He names it in his head, does not speak, and slides his fingers along the star compass rail to the knots that will matter next. Clouds can borrow the sky, but the rail does not forget. The steerage remains a conversation with swell only. The paddle moves little. The canoe reads. A gourd rattle stays lazy. Lashings keep their tone. Between hulls, the sea runs like silk being drawn through a hand. Everything answers simple. Toward the west, a thin thinning suggests the lid will lift in an hour or two. The navigator blinks slow and lets his shoulders fall. The line holds. The road stays open. Evening returns by lifting a lid. The western sky thins sooner than the rest, and a first light pricks through as if it had been waiting patiently behind cloth. The crew notices in small ways. One shoulder loosens, one breath lengthens. The navigator sets his palm on the platform and feels the long roller steady beneath. He looks to the soft gap in the cloud and names the first star without voice. It rises in the notch he expected. He slides his fingers one mark along the rail. The course has kept its promise. Another star answers above the bowl, then a third to the right like a friendly witness. The ceiling opens in quiet squares until the whole page of sky is readable again. The crab claw remains folded. The wind is a wind tonight. The canoe keeps faith with swell and with the slow touch of the steering blade. Under the lashings, the drumbeat has the same patient tone as last night's watch. He smiles because sameness is a kind of gift on long water. Smell reaches the canoe before sight can. It arrives as a thin sweetness that does not belong to open sea leaf and soa, and a hint of birds' roosts far off. The helmsman tilts his head as if listening with his nose. A crewman nods once, adding nothing. They do not turn. They let the line continue until more clues agree. Birds glide where birds sleep on air itself. A frigate bird hangs in the last light as if hooked to the moon. Turns sketch low curves and then rise to a height that suggests they are choosing a place rather than searching for one. Their arcs repeat from the same quarter, then tighten. The navigator keeps count with his thumb against the rail. After the third repeat, he gives the paddle the most modest suggestion to lean a breath toward that memory in the wind. The nose yields a finger's width, no more. The sea offers its own counsel. He listens for a faint echo returning through the platform, reflected energy from something hard, far ahead and slightly to port. It comes after the count he learned at first gray, perhaps a touch sooner now. He waits for a second echo and hears it in the same place. He marks it with breath rather than chalk and lets the canoe move a thumb more toward the sound. A change in water's color joins the chorus. Not a bright milk this time, but a subtle lightening as if someone had slipped a little river into the blue far off. He keeps the canoe's nose just outside that paler band. A line of foam shows at the horizon like thin linen laid flat and then lifted. Breakers on a reef have that way of writing without a pen. He does not let the canoe aim for that white. He keeps to the dark path that runs parallel. The crew prepares for patience. The sail stays tied. A sea anchor, a woven mat with a short line, goes over the bow to hold the nose to the long roller if wind forgets itself. The line runs easy over the forebeam. A knot in the middle keeps it from slipping too far. A gourd rattle is moved to the forward lashing so it will whisper if the mat tugs too strong. Baskets rest inboard, cords checked, gourds wrapped. A child wakes and blinks toward the pale line and is gently turned to look at stars instead. Voices stay small. A chant would be welcome, but the night has offered its own rhythm, the hush between waves, the faint scrape of line on wood, the sigh of breath. The navigator names his next star houses in order in his head, this one to keep the path, that one to keep the latitude, the other to promise a turn when done agrees. He sets the star at his shoulder as the moon taught him, and keeps the long drummer under the same rib. Canoe follows with the willing calm of a practiced partner. They eat a little. Roasted taro breaks with the soft sound of torn bread. Dried fish offers its salt. Water passes mouth to mouth with the care people give shared things. Salt on skin turns to cool once the sun's power has gone. A mat covers the child's feet. Someone tucks the leaf bundle of food tighter under the beam. Someone else moves a hook line so it will not find toes. The reef's voice grows a shade louder, not loud, only more sure of itself. It speaks in a low, unbroken line, different from wind chop, different from the boat's own noise. The navigator turns the paddle an inch so the sea anchor holds the nose a touch farther from that white band, and the canoe drifts along the reef rather than toward it. He watches for pauses by feel and by a break in the foam, a notch in the sound, a river of darker water moving seaward. One appears a smooth seam interrupting the white, a flume where lagoon water pours outward. He notes its angle, marks a star above it, and does not enter. Night turns even a known doorway into a puzzle. Morning is safer for thresholds. Stars deepen. The bright ones take their places as if seating for a familiar performance. He measures one with fist and thumb and checks it against the rail's notch. He hums once to himself for the pure pleasure of confirmation. He remembers another voyage when this same star rose over a different reef far away, and how that crew also waited outside until birds woke fully and cloud took color. Waiting has a flavor. It tastes like restraint, and water, and warm rope on the pond. The canoe makes a comfortable bed out of lines and light. The sea anchor keeps it from wandering. The steering paddle rests, its blade still in the water like a foot trailing in a stream. Lashings settle with tiny adjustments he feels more than hears. A flying fish startles once. Skittering bright notes across the surface, it lands, and silence arranges itself again. The navigator leans back against the beam and watches a star he has chosen as a clock. When it reaches a certain house, Dong will push a finger under the edge of night. He rubs a small spot on the deck where oil and salt make a darker oval the habit hand place. He thinks of the path behind, he thinks of the path to come. He does not think of numbers or names of places. He thinks of birds that will draw guidance in the air and clouds that will collect color, and the sound of water over coral heads that will flatten in daylight from long to wide. He leaves one instruction behind his teeth for first light. Bring the canoe across the pale seam where the reef's voice breaks. Follow the seaward river inward while the tide is friendly. And then let the canoe rest inside a ring of quiet water. He will say the words when he can lay a finger on the cut through the white, and the sun can lay a finger there too. Stars keep watch with him. The crew sleeps in turns, one always awake, trimming thought and line. The child's breathing becomes the metronome everything else falls into. The gourd rattle remains shy. The mat that drags ahead holds the nose where it should. Time moves, but not in a way that needs announcing. The first thin promise of gray shows again in the east. He tastes the air and finds leaf and soil a little stronger. Birds lift off the dark like ideas. The reef line turns from white to a dull pale, the pass shows a softer stripe. He will wait a bit more, enough to let shape sharpen, and the tide fall into a kinder phase. He lifts the sea anchor by hand, letting water leave it without scold, and coils the line on the forebeam. He touches the rail's notch, moves one finger to the next, and sets the paddle for a breath later. The canoe gathers itself without making a point of it. Before the work of daylight begins, he looks up once more. The stars that taught the night have started their retreat, but they still sit where he last checked. He thanks them in the language of bone and habit. He lays a palm flat on the platform to thank the canoe in the same language. He nods toward the crewman on the sheet and says to small words. The sheet answers the plan. The bow points not at the white but at the gap where water goes out, and will let them in when the sun finishes erasing the last of worry. The night voyage closes the way a careful hand closes a lid. Slow, square, content. The ocean remains large, the canoe remains small. Both keep their dignity. The line they held all night has brought them to a threshold, and thresholds prefer patient friends. Now these quiet hours can keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.